Nancy, you ready? You haven't. They made a presentation on various financial models and, it's all work and, there's some complexity to it. For the City of Laguna Beach Planning Commission meeting of November 20th, 2024. May I have roll call, please?
Here.
Commissioner Dubin,
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg,
Here.
Chair Sadler.
Here. Let the record show that Commissioner Goldman is absent this evening. The beginning of our meeting is time for public communications. This time, members of the public may come up to speak on matters that are under the Planning Commission's purview, but not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody who would like to make public comments tonight? Seeing none, we'll close the public comments and we'll go to the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of a modified resolution for the denial of temporary use permit 24-1512 and coastal development permit 24-1513. Is there any members of the Planning Commission who would like to pull that item? Are there any members of the public who would wish to pull that particular item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and go to, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Is
Second.
roll call, please. Yes. No, if you're here to comment on one of the regular agenda items, that'll happen later on. A roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten,
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yes.
Chair Kellenberg,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg, Chair Sadler.
Yes. Okay, the consent calendar is passed unanimously. With Commissioner Golden being absent. Okay, we'll move on to our public hearings. Our first public hearing is item 5.1, and it's a temporary use permit 24-2326 and coastal development permit 24-2327. on the public right of way adjacent to 234 Forest Avenue. And Louis Lacasella will be presenting this item or these items for us tonight.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Louis Lacasella, Senior Analyst. As mentioned, item 5.1 this evening is consideration of request for a TUP and a CDP to place a tent over an existing outdoor dining parklet operated by Alyssa. The existing parklet was approved via the city's outdoor dining and parklet program, which is to run through January 1st of 2026. The project is located in the public right-of-way adjacent to 234 Forest Avenue. The project description consists of a tent measuring 20 by 30 and is proposed to be placed directly on the existing parklet and will include bistro lights inside the tent. The tent would be used each December and January for 2024, 2025, and 2026. And obviously they're being used for those months to provide seasonal protection to the guests attending the restaurant. And this tent was previously approved via a previous TUP, and no changes are being recommended from the request of this prior entitlement. So just once again, there was a previous TUP that was approved a couple years ago, and given the expiration of that, that's why we have to bring forward this TUP again to establish the new entitlement for the permit. The project is in compliance with the required TUP findings, and the temporary use is also consistent with the city's general plan. The project is also in compliance with CDP requirements, and they'll have no impact on coastal resources, visitor serving facilities, or coastal access, and the tent will also not interfere with the sidewalk. The project is exempt from CEQA via Class 1 existing facilities. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission by motion adopt the attached resolution approving temporary use permit 24-2326 and coastal development permit 24-2327 and finding said action exempt from California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA under state CEQA guidelines 15301. And staff and the applicant are available for any questions the commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff at this point? Commissioner Dubin?
Yeah, I've got a couple. It's my understanding that the parklet program is sunsetting in 2026, and since this TUP is for a 3-year period, how do we reconcile that? I mean, should we only be looking at this December and January for this TUP versus a 3-year period?
Yes, that's a really good question. So given that the state currently is supposed to sunset January 1st of 2026, approving it for the entire month of January, I guess a couple considerations that we would take into consideration would be if the state would extend the program or the city would look into establishing a similar program. So we put in there as January, but obviously there'd be some flexibility. You know, if the program is expired, we would provide notice to the applicant to remove the tents and obviously provide them with necessary time to do that.
You know, I'm looking at your display here, and it looks like the tent is transparent. Is that what I'm seeing here? Because it describes it as white. Has that changed, or is this just a rendering off the internet for some?
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah, that's the rendering to it. My understanding is it is not transparent. The applicant could speak a little bit more on the design of it.
Okay.
But I think that was just for the purposes of that picture.
And so looking in the general plan policy 3.7, you know, it speaks to the visual interest of this. And I'm just wondering, I know this is kind of a subjective question or maybe statement that, you know, a white plastic tent, I'm not sure it creates visual interest. What is staff's feeling on that? If any.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll provide a little bit, and then I'm sure Anthony has some more thoughts on it too. Given that a similar, you know, the exact same design was approved under the previous TUP, we thought that, you know, the applicant bringing forward the same design still meets the requirements of the city's code. And that's why we didn't recommend any changes to it from a design perspective.
Yeah, I understand that. I know that has existed before, but I'm just curious, when we talk about, creating visual interest, if there's some alternative tent materials that may have a little bit more of an aesthetic appeal versus just white plastic.
It's a great question, Commissioner. I'll just remind the Planning Commission that ultimately staff is presenting recommended findings. Should you choose to approve the project this evening, the analysis provided in that portion of the staff report relates to policy 3.7, which encourages retention and attraction of small businesses throughout the community.
Right.
And it's not reliant on the Planning Commission finding that the tent is providing visual interest. And perhaps to your point, the tent probably should try to visually recede as much as feasibly possible. It's not a carnival tent, for example. We don't want it to be an attraction in and of itself.
I want stripes and clowns and, okay, I understand that. My last question, and I'll make this brief, is, if we are allowing this to happen, and I know the second item on our agenda is for the same issue, does that open the door for, like our previous meeting, we had a trellis situation? Would all other parklets that are connected to restaurants during December and January be entitled to do the same thing if they want?
Yeah.
And so I can go ahead and jump in. The short answer from a legal perspective is absolutely not no. Each case is its own independent application. Each case, I'm going to tell you as a staff is going to tell the Planning Commission, you guys must make the required findings. As it pertains to how you for tonight want to deal with consistency and potentially equity, that's kind of your guys' realm. But from my perspective, no, there's no such thing as a precedential value that, hey, because someone else may have got something similar last meeting, last year, last month, I am entitled to it. No, that's not, no, I do not have that concern.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yeah, we've been flooded with support letters, as you all know. Were there any, I didn't see any letters from the neighbors, any of the other adjacent businesses or businesses on Forest Avenue. Do you have any information on that, Louis?
Besides the letters that were provided, we haven't received any opposition to this, to this application.
Okay, or support from any of the local Forest Avenue?
Hang on, we're going to take public comment. Apologies.
Okay, all right, we'll wait for the public comment then. All right, thank you.
I had a follow-up for Commissioner Dubin's question. I wasn't sure if I understood this, but so what we're being asked here is to approve this temporary use permit for the next 3 years, for December and January. So presumably through January 2026, but in the conditions of approval in the resolution, it says the entitlements granted by this resolution expire and lapse on January 1st, 2026. How again did those things relate?
Yes, thanks for the question, Chair. Louis can correct me if I misstate anything, but the sunset date in your draft resolution is intended to coincide with the expiration on the current entitlements that govern the temporary promenade improvements. And so, of course, once the parklet itself goes away, there won't be a need to provide tent covering over that outdoor dining area because the underlying use will no longer exist as of January 1st, 2026.
So I still don't understand. Does that mean that the tent will not be there for January 2026 through the entire month?
That is correct, Chair. Yes, it would be essentially installed for the month of December of 2025 and be removed by the first of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, does the wording need to be clarified to reflect this discussion?
I don't believe so. As Anthony explained, that, project condition number 15 is pretty clear cut. It says the entitlements granted by this resolution expire and lapse on January 1st, 2026. That's about as clear as we can get.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So we have a couple of these tonight, and I assume there'll be more coming. And the designs are the same. Is the staff recommending a standard design for these, or is it just by coincidence that they're the same? I think it'd be a good idea if there was continuity in these tent structures, but I don't know if that's really happening on purpose or just accidentally.
Yeah. So just a couple points on that. Given that these were previously approved under a previous TUP, we're bringing those forward again for basically a renewal. There are no other TUPs in the pipeline that have tents that we're going to be taking forward to the city, to the Planning Commission anytime soon. We haven't received anything like that. These two, it's just because they've had a previous entitlement and now that expired, so they're bringing it forward.
So the other ones that will occur are already entitled. There'll be more than 2 tents on the promenade, I assume.
These are the only two
These are the only 2?
that are going to be approved, yeah,
Okay.
at this time.
Okay. I'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant team here? You want to come forward? You can either stand at the podium or you could sit at the table, whatever you're more comfortable.
All right. I'm Catherine Reinhardt. I'm here on behalf of Alessandra Prozzi, owner of Alessa. Just here to request the approval for the tents. We've had them for the last 3 years, no issues. Really, really good positive feedback from the public, keeping them warm from the frigid weather. To answer your question about what the tents look like, they are clear with white trim. We've had the same tents every year. So you can open them, you can close them up based on the weather. So in the daytime, a lot of times we have them opened up. Nighttime, we close them up, keep people warm from the wind and weather.
Great.
Any questions?
Any questions for the applicant?
So, sorry, can we get that slide back up there? I'm just kind of curious. The sides of this are clear or?
They're clear. That photo's pretty accurate. It's the trims on the sides are white. The rest of it's clear. Even the top is clear.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like white trim.
So basically you can see through the whole thing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. That's it. Yeah, they retract, open, close.
So what we're seeing here is a good representation. of
Fairly
what-
accurate, actually, yeah.
Okay, because, I know in the past, people have just put up like solid white.
No, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, no, these are really nice. These are very, very nice. They've already been paid for. They're
Okay.
already taken care of. Same ones that we used previously, no issues.
So they're relatively transparent, so you can see
They are
through.
100%
Okay,
transparent, yeah,
thanks very much.
absolutely.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? If you do, please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes. After you're done speaking, if you could print your name on the list that's on the
I did.
table behind you.
Okay. My name's Paul Puma. My wife and I are 40-year residents of Laguna Beach. We work really hard to shop and dine in Laguna Beach and keep the money here. Now that I know winter is a hard word because in Laguna, it's really not winter, but it is cold out there. We've had to start going to the Spectrum or over to Passion Island to find dining that has outside eating that's covered and warmer, which pains me, but that's what we're having to do. I'm really concerned, comes Thanksgiving week's coming up, our grandkids come to town, and the tradition has always been go out on the parklet and enjoy a nice, pre-Thanksgiving dinner. Not going to happen this year without the tents there. So we're going to, again, go to the Spectrum. And then you got Valentine's Day. I've already made arrangements for Valentine's Day out of town. So the money that we've spent here for 40 years is starting to filter out of town. And I'm baffled as to why anybody would not want these tents up and make a nice, warm, inviting environment, not only for residents, but for tourists. I went by there before this meeting. There's nobody out there. I mean, it's cold and nobody's out there. So I'm very confused as to why we're at this point. And the fact that they're only asking for 2 months is also surprising. It used to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it came up in October and down 1st of March. And I don't know the exact dates because I'm not involved in this, but I know it went longer than just 2 months. So, but, 2 months as a resident, I'll take it if that's what it takes to get out there and enjoy the city again. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Charmaine Brown, and I'm the daughter of Joseph, who owns the shoe cellar on Forest Avenue. And we're a legacy business. We've been there since 1949. 2 families have run the shoe cellar. And we just wanted to take this opportunity to bring to your attention and to urge you to consider that the promenade at large has impacted the businesses on Forest. We love our restaurants. Alessa, in fact, did the food for my dad's funeral. So we don't want to see them hurt. But the fact is, the retailers are being hurt. We're being hurt month after month. This year, we had the lowest sales day in the history of the store. I have a lot of local customers, and I mean a lot of local customers, reaching out to us, talking about how they can't park anywhere near the store anymore. For a little while, they were able to park in the library, but that seems to have stopped. And in the same way, the cold weather needs some warmth if people are trying to eat. The restaurants do have some indoor seating, I mean, for years. But more to the point, this idea of transparency and being able to see the stores, I think it's really important, and I hope it's really taken into consideration. Some of the better sales we had last summer were actually from people who could see our stores from the restaurants, because we do stay open late. We try and stay open late at night. But this has really been a hardship. Our sales have plummeted. So I'm not sure what else to add to that other than, am I forgetting something? It is something to please consider. I mean, and I'm just not just talking about our store. Other local stores have said the same thing. I mean, Bouchard's has mentioned it. And Fresh Produce, the olive oil store, went out. So people can't park already, and I'm hoping that you do consider the hybrid model. So, we're not talking about, oh, we don't want the tents. That's really not why I'm here. I just really want to emphasize the other businesses, some of which are legacy businesses who've been here for decades, are being hurt. And I really think that our ability to thrive and survive and support the community should be taken into consideration. And that was it.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that a little bit, I want to point out there's kind of 2 separate issues here. It sounds as though your concern is more about the promenade in general and the loss of parking there rather than this
Well, I'm
temporary
saying that
use permit for the tent.
Well, yes and no. So yes, in the sense that, yes, the promenade at large. But in terms of the tents, I just, I would like to bring it to the attention that the ability for people on the other side of the street, we've already lost a lot of foot traffic. We've already lost a lot of foot traffic due to the existing situation with the promenade. But when the tents go up, we're going to lose a lot of visibility.
Okay.
And that's my concern. And it really is hurting. I'm not saying this to be difficult. Like I said, I love our restaurants, but I love our retailers too. And I love our town. So
Understood. Thank
really
you.
just want to bring that to the forefront.
Okay. Thanks. Next speaker.
Good evening, Violet Sarhat. I've been in this town as a resident and business owner since 1994. And I used to have Chantilly Ice Cream Shop, 202 Park Avenue, Violet Fashion on PCH next to previous White House. I had Chantel Beauty Supply and Salon, across from the main beach, and present time, 241 Forest Avenue, Violet Boutique. When yes, the same thing with Promenade, completely opposite. I'm not in favor of it. Our sales has radically dropped in past over 20, 25 years, worst year ever. We are all bleeding. Many stores are leaving. Again, not related, but I just want to bring it to everybody's attention. After all, we all live in this town. And when the tents come up, when you are sitting inside, maybe it is kind of translucent. But when there is two and people are walking on the sidewalk by the restaurants, it is blocked. They don't see shoe seller, they don't see us. They just want to pass by quick and keep on going. We have lost many businesses since in past 2-3 years, the tents have been up. 30-40%, I have no problem with showing you gentlemen our sales since the tents have gone up. We are suffering, they are suffering, and I don't think it's fair for us. And we love the restaurants. I send so many people, I order from them, but we have to find out that balance. We are getting hurt, and I'm not in favor of it. Doesn't work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alice Brown, and we just lost Joseph Brown, who was the owner of the shoe seller for many years. The tents are unsightly when you look from our side of the store. You just see these tents up there. Nobody could look into the store. We've been open, we stay open as a convenience to our locals. We want you people to shop in our store. And unlike the other person who has to go to Irvine, we hope all of you will come to Laguna Beach. The restaurants are very good. The food is good. I myself had my husband's celebration of life catered by Alessa. So we do enjoy the food, but they are half the time they're empty on the inside because people are sitting on the outside. This encroachment of the street started during COVID and was supposed to end, but it never did. And so we have lost our mature customers who are not prepared to walk. They can't walk blocks just to come and shop. They tell us that on the phone all the time. And we have had to literally deliver shoes to their houses or tell them, okay, come in the back and we'll come from the back. But with shoes, you have to try them on. You have to sit down, you have to relax, and you have to feel comfortable. This is not, we as small businesses are hurting. This is the worst year we've had, 2024. And I hate to say that because we stay open. We started to close early now in the past couple of months at 7, 8. We used to stay open till past 9. And I think many of the customers would say, oh, we knew you'd be open because we were one of the few stores that stayed open. So I urge all of you to consider the fact that the street is empty after 7 because of the tents, because of the promenade. Before, people would come, park, shop, and then go. Now they have nowhere. They don't walk at night after 7. Occasionally in the mornings too, you see all of those chairs are empty. I think the beauty of Laguna Beach is in its different shops that it has and the beach itself. So why is this promenade, to me, it doesn't make sense at all. I do have an MBA, and I know what I'm talking about in terms of business. So I urge all of you to consider all the shops on the opposite side because we are hurting. We're hurting a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for going over time.
Thank you for the questions that you had earlier, especially what George was pointing out. My name is Ann Christoph. I was here last time when we had the trellis that you mentioned. And if you look at the findings that you just adopted for the rejection of the trellis,
and you think about, shouldn't those same findings apply in this case? I think they fit perfectly. Remember that that outdoor seating was intended to replace the fact that the restaurants couldn't serve indoors. Now they can serve indoors. So I don't think we need to have those tents any longer. So I hope that you will not approve these two applications, because I think the openness of the promenade and the visibility across the promenade, as these previous speakers have pointed out, it is part of the equity of this situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Cohen, operating partner, 230 Forest Avenue. We've reduced the tents from 4 months down to 2 per request from the city with no opposition at all. To George's point, the tents are exactly the same as they've been over the years. They're the most expensive tents we can possibly get our hands on. It was requested by the city at that time that we use a very certain type of tent where the sides are closable and open, and on the sides they're clear. You can see through them when they're closed. Throughout the day, they're completely open. So the tent is open. The roof is not completely white. It is see-through. There is clear all the way around. If there's any questions that I can answer for you, I absolutely will. Our goal is to give the downtown as much business as possible, right? The more people that we can get in the restaurant and stare at the stores, again, just like they come to our stores, we try and send our customers to them as well. I've been here over 30 years. My goal is for the health and well-being of this town. That's what we do. So any questions about?
Just look like it. No. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other speakers on this item? Seeing none, back to the applicant. If there's anything you would like to add or anything you'd like to respond to from the other comments.
Yeah, you know, it's been a tough time for everyone these last couple of years with the economy. I don't think it matters really what business you're in. We've all seen a little bit of a downfall, and it's always sad to hear businesses talking like that. But, this tent takes up maybe 40 feet of the street. It's see-through. I can't imagine a tent, being the issue for, a store's economical problems. It's really sad to hear, but it's just really a small portion of the street. It's open during the day. People are sitting there for an hour. They're looking at the stores. They're having a couple drinks. That's what they want. Those are the ones that are going shopping. Any questions?
Nope.
No? Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll close the public hearing and we'll go to commissioner comments. Anybody in particular want to start? Commissioner Kellenberg?
Yeah, I'll start. I think this is different from the one we looked at the other, our last meeting. That was a permanent structure. A 12-month-a-year structure. I think it was structurally and aesthetically, questionable. This is a 2-month-a-year structure. It's something that we've been doing for several years. I tend to agree that I think bringing people down and having them sit for an hour, having dinner and lunch and looking across the street is actually, offsets the limited blockage of the tents of the storefronts on the other side, just my opinion. And I think that the storefronts are, out of 100% of visibility, they're still 90% visible by other angles on the other side of the street, as well as the street that the stores are on. The fact that they are open a lot of the time, the fact that they are clear, I think is also a mitigating factor. And I think it does help support, the businesses and which is, I'm not sure it's essential for the support of the businesses, but I think it does support the restaurant businesses. So I'm going to be positive relative to this project.
Thank you. Commissioner Whiten?
I agree with all the points that my fellow commissioner has just made. I would go even further. I am not a great fan of the parklets as they're currently designed. And I think that as the city moves towards a permanent promenade, a lot of these questions, including this issue of seasonal use, will be addressed. It will be addressed so there's better equity with the location of these parklets, with the seasonal treatment of using the parklets, with the design of the parklets themselves. And at this point, the parklets are legal. They are legal until January 1st, 2026, under state law. And there, as Commissioner Kellenberg said, this is not the first time we've approved this exact tent design for this location, and the second one that's on the next item on the agenda. So whereas I am sympathetic to the retail businesses, and I understand the frustration, I do believe that the city is committed in the future to get this to work in a much more equitable way for the retail businesses as well as the restaurants. So I will be supporting this project.
Commissioner Dubin.
Yeah, I feel like, since the pandemic, which was what triggered all the outdoor dining in Laguna because they couldn't be inside, we're in kind of a transitional phase at this point in terms of what's happening with the promenade. That's being looked at. There's other people working on that right at the moment. And I know that, the evolution of that will, affect what happens with the restaurants. I don't think it's been fully determined or decided how the outdoor seating is going to work, if it's going to be exclusive to the restaurants or if it's going to be open seating for anybody who wants to sit down there. So those things have not been defined yet. It's also something that the restaurants are going to have to deal with in terms of if they are allotted outdoor seating, there's going to be issues with their current CUPs to be dealt with because they're increasing their seating. So that's a whole nother issue. And as my fellow commissioners stated, we're all sympathetic to the inconvenience of the last 3.5, 4 years that has happened. But in order to keep the town functional, the parklets have been an asset. Now that they've been there for almost 4 years, people are very used to the concept of having outdoor dining. I think it's energized a lot of our downtown. And yes, I drive through there all the time, and on some of these weeknights, and by 7 or 8 o'clock, it's pretty dead down there. But I think that with the evolution of the promenade going forward, with some things that will draw more people downtown, and part of it is businesses themselves. Everybody has to evolve, I think, and it's what things were 10, 20 years ago is not what's happening now. And I don't think you can point the finger at these translucent, transparent tents for 2 months as the reason why retail has been a little flatlined, because we have a lot of online shopping now. It's just a very different environment. And I think everybody, is trying to do their best to accommodate and create equity for everybody down on Lower Forest and other parts of the community. But, we all have to evolve. We all have to, recognize that, retail has changed considerably, especially since the pandemic. So, I think we've had these tents up in the past. I think that, because the whole program is set to sunset in 2026, we'll see what happens then. That's going to be a decision of not only the state, but our city council is going to have to weigh in as to whether or not they want to either modify or continue or completely discontinue that program. So considering that the restaurants have reduced their period of, having the tents up to December and January, I think it's an accommodation that they've done for the other retailers down there. So I feel like at least for this December and January that we could approve, or I'm going to be in favor of approving this, and we'll see what's our city council and how things continue to materialize next year in terms of the whole promenade project as well, because that's being looked at by quite a large group of people in the community, as well as several council members. So those are my comments.
Great. I don't have a whole lot to add. I agree with my fellow commissioners. I believe this is pretty significantly different from the other trellis parklet issue we had from a couple weeks ago. And when I was first thinking about it and it being just for December and January, I couldn't remember the history of it. I thought that we had previously approved, temporary use permit, which we did, but it was for a longer period of time. And because I think in terms of the rainy season, and I think of that more continuing through March. But they've compromised on this and have agreed to only have these up for 2 months. So I think because of the more temporary nature of it, I'm willing to support it. And I think, from what I'm hearing from some of the other business owners, it's more an issue about, displeasure with the promenade in general and the lack of parking. And, I understand that. And I understand, some of the feelings aren't universal. I know business owners down there on Forest who are fine with the promenade and have not thought that they've suffered a lack of a business because of it. So anyhow, I am in favor of this. And so, this has been mandated, kind of as an approved program by the state that the city has gone along with. And it sounds like it's going to continue until January 2026. So if somebody would like to make a motion for this item.
I move that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-2313, approving temporary use permit 24-2313 and coastal development
I
permit.
think you're.
Am I in the wrong one?
Yeah. I'm seeing different numbers, 2326.
Chair, you are correct.
2326. Okay. Strike that. I move that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-2326, approving temporary use permit 24-2326 and coastal development permit 24-2327, and finding said action exempt from CEQA under state CEQA guidelines, section 15301.
Second.
A roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten,
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg,
Yes.
Chair Sadler,
Yes. So motion passes unanimously. There's a 14-day right of appeal to the city council for anybody who doesn't agree with that decision. Thank you. Okay, we'll be moving on to item 5.2, which is basically an identical item. It is another temporary use permit request for a temporary tent structure for the months of December and January for the adjacent restaurant. And that is temporary permit 24-2313 and coastal development permit 24-2314. And Louis Lacasella will be presenting this item as well, which again is very similar to the previous item.
Good evening again, Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Louis Lacasella. So as mentioned, item 5.2 this evening is a similar request for a TUP and a CDP. The only difference in change is just the project location, this time for 230 Forest Avenue. The findings, design, everything is the same, just different project location. We have to have 2 TUPs and 2 CDPs for both of the businesses as they're operating the existing parklets, which the tents are going over. So with that, staff and applicant are happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of staff at this point? Okay, if the applicant would like to come forward and if you have anything to say. Okay, any questions for the applicant? All right, I'll open it to the public again. Anybody, member of the public who wishes to speak on this item, please come forward.
So now we have a double extension of the tent, which takes up half of the place that has been closed off. I don't understand why the city council is not helping the retailers that bring in people and help the community. The restaurants have the restaurants. If they have good food, people are going to come there. You don't need a tent. This was only started because of COVID. And now it's just continuing and continuing. And what happens when we close? You know, we've been a shoe store since the 40s over there at 245 Forest. Violet has been there. The olive oil, something different, has gone out of business. I believe we would love to see a little bit responsiveness to the fact that Laguna has no parking on Forest. The people who have parking are quite happy with the promenade because, you know, you sell one Rolex watch and you can pay rent. And other stores in the corner don't have to worry because Forest is closed off and then it's open for them. For us, it's closed off. And I urge all of you to be considerate. Shoes are a very important part of our lives. Why everybody needs a good pair of shoes. And we work very hard so that we can provide that service to our local customers. So I hope you all will consider again this big, massive tent. Soon Moulin will have a tent. And across the street, Harmony will have a tent. And what's going to happen to the retailers? You know, just please consider all of that. I thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Hi again. I just wanted to add one thing because I've heard this said now multiple times from people in this room that we all have to evolve. People have been buying shoes and other items online for 25 years. It didn't start during the pandemic. And we have evolved. And if you've worked in retail, you know that you need to evolve every season. It's not consistent. Every 6 months or so, you evolve. Every 6 months or so, you go to the fashion shows. You go to Atlanta. You go to San Francisco. You go to Fanny in New York. You evolve. So in terms of evolution, the retailers are evolving. That's part of what retail is by nature. And I just had to address that to you, Mr. Dubin, specifically because I have heard that said so many times. As so our concern is about we're trying to stay the same as we were 10 years ago. That's not what we're doing. We're evolving, we're changing, we get new things in all the time. And we have a long list of Laguna Beach locals. They're the ones coming to us saying, I can't get to the store. I have postcards, I have letters in addition to phone calls and visits. These are from locals telling us they can't come to us. And so I just want to be really clear. It's not just, oh no, we're just trying to maximize our visibility in every way possible because we have been hurt. And it's not our fault. It's not because we're not evolving. That is simply untrue. I had a customer who is not local. He's local adjacent, Newport, spent $300. Couldn't get into town twice last summer. And then on the second time, he couldn't park. And he went home again. So this is not just retailers saying, oh, we're not willing to change. We do. And we want everyone to survive. We want the restaurants to thrive. But we also want you to want us to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Yeah, Paul Puma again. I just want to reiterate, I'm a real live shopper, lived here 40 years. We are not shopping in town at night when it's cold. I mean, it's easier to go to Irvine Spectrum and shop there. So despite what you're hearing, we do shop here, but not when it's sitting out there cold. And my comments are the same for this proposal as it was for the previous one. I think we need it. It's 2 months, for crying out loud. I don't think that's a big problem. You know, I would much rather take my golf cart from my house into town and have a nice warm dinner outside than to have to drive all the way to the Irvine Spectrum. Okay? It's much easier for me to leave the money here and much more convenient. So I don't think 2 months is going to make a difference one way or the other for the shops in town. So thank you.
Thank you.
Back again, Violet. Amazon has been there for a long time. And yes, I do shop, unfortunately, on Amazon too. So it's not, the impact is not just because people are ordering online. I have engineering background from University of Toronto. I've been in business since I was a university student. I've had 4 or 5 businesses in town. I think I have pretty much kind of information and knowledge about business. What the tents are gonna do or doing, it's taking away that visibility for that 2 months. It has a big impact on us. Maybe, hey, the restaurants or the city can pay half of our rent. I'll be wow and go for it, no problem. Or maybe they can, I'm always fair. I was one of the people that always was in favor of tents in Europe. I've lived in Europe many part of my life. It should be European, that doesn't work with American culture. It's very different. But how about just being fair? How about if they pull the tents up at 5 o'clock in the evening? Because by 5, it's kind of dark in December and January. Anyways, as the gentleman mentioned, because the street is closed, not many people in cold want to park and walk to our stores. We have lost those clienteles, unfortunately. So how about at 5 o'clock when it's dark? We are not getting that many clienteles. They can have the tents up and they can get their clients too in the evening for dinner. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers out there? Seeing none, back to the applicant, if you'd like to
Mark
chime in.
Cohen, operating partner, 230 Forest. Again, I believe the restaurants are more in need of parking than anyone else. And our goal is to bring the customers to the street and have those customers shop on the street at night when the stores are open. Most of the stores unfortunately close at 6 o'clock or 6:30. And the ones that do stay open, we try and send our customers to on a regular basis. They're actually 20 feet closer to those stores when they're on the promenade, when they can stare into their stores or see the sale signs or the stores open and thriving at that time. Again, our goal is to bring people to the street. That's the goal.
Thank
Any
you.
questions on the tent itself, what we're talking about?
Just a reiteration that they are sides and roof are mostly transparent.
They are correct. And they do retract. So if it's not 45 degrees at 8 o'clock at night, we can open them up. And we will.
And
They're open all day. I mean,
I was
we
gonna-
only close them at, when your wife says it's, too cold, we close them and turn the heat on.
So during the day.
They're wide open all day.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And they have been for the last 3 years. Nothing's going to change. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other public speakers? No. Okay. I will close the public hearing and go to commissioner comments. Want to start in reverse order?
I don't really have anything more to add than what we talked about the last time, so I'm going to move approval.
I have nothing further to add. My comments would be the same, and I am supporting this project.
Commissioner Kellenberg.
Well, I just think we have to clarify the issue here tonight is not the parking, the lack of parking. The issue is the tents. I commiserate with the lack of parking, and I think you should, and I'm sure you will, speak up when the time comes, when hearings are open at the council and here on the promenade itself. I know there has been some discussion on a hybrid plan. I'm not sure where that stands. We're not really a part of that, but this is really about the tents, and I just don't think we're convinced that having tents that are open most of the business day and close at night or in inclement weather for that 40 feet are for 2 months of the year are going to have a significant impact on your business. I just don't think we're convinced that's the case, and we're sympathetic to the fact that the businesses are having a tough time, but not that. This isn't going to be the linchpin for success, or not. And we do have a tradition of these. People enjoy them. And I actually do believe that having those people sitting there staring at their storefronts for an hour, having a couple glasses of wine, people always buy more, after a couple drinks. It offsets, in my mind, some of these visibility concerns. So I'm going to continue to be for this project.
Thank you. And, my comments are the same as the previous item. The city's trying to deal with the multiple issues. This promenade is going to be a continuing issue. You'll have chances to weigh in on the promenade and its future existence. Parking in general is a citywide issue. Public transportation is a citywide issue. One suggestion I would make to some of your clients and customers who are having difficulty with parking in the area is, if they're local residents, suggest that they look into the Laguna Local trolley transit service. I mean, not a lot of residents understand how valuable a service that is and how convenient it is. And it's a easy, relative easy, it's not like a door-to-door drop-off, but it's a way to get from your neighborhood to downtown and without having to drive your own car and park. So, that's an option to suggest that to some of your customers. But other than that, I am in support of this. So if somebody would like to make a motion for this item.
Sure. I'll move that we adopt Resolution 24-2313, approving temporary use permit 24-2313 and coastal development permit 24-2314, and finding said action exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act under state CEQA guidelines, section 1530-031.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten,
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg,
Yes.
Chair Sadler.
Yes. Okay, again, motion passes unanimously, and there is a 14-day right of appeal to the city council if somebody doesn't agree with that decision. Thank you. And we'll be moving on to item 5.3. That's conditional use permit 24-1913 and design review 24-2013. Located at 634 Glen Eyrie Street. And Kate Kazama, our Assistant Associate Planner, will be presenting that item for us tonight. Kate, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Chair Sadler and members of the Planning Commission. Oops, sorry. Let me start back from the beginning. Okay. Good evening, Chair Sadler and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Kate Kazama, Associate Planner, and item 5.3 is a conditional use permit request to establish and expand a non-conforming residential use in the LBP zone, as well as a design review request for exterior facade changes and new or expanded window and door openings at 634 Glen Eyrie Street. The project site is located within the local business professional zone on the southeast corner of Glen Eyrie Street and El Camino del Mar. The property is currently developed with a one-story, 1,024 square foot single-family residence constructed in 1936. In 2009, the city adopted Ordinance 1519 that approved a general plan land use and zone designation amendment for certain properties, including the subject property, which changed the zoning designation from R2 to local business professional, making the existing home legal nonconforming. Pursuant to the city's municipal code, a nonconforming use cannot be enlarged or expanded. Therefore, in order to allow for enlargements, the property must be formally established as a conforming residential use through approval of a CUP. The applicant would be maintaining the single-story design of the existing structure, and the proposed additions are less than 15 feet in height. The areas of the addition include legalizing a 136 square foot conversion of an existing patio cover at the rear, and an additional 79 square feet of floor area to relocate the entry from Glenary to El Camino del Mar, and expand an existing bathroom. Because the project involves a CUP request, the design review component of the project requires Planning Commission's review as well. Tonight's request involves design review of the exterior material and color changes and new or expanded window and door openings. The applicant is proposing a combination of black fiber cement vertical paneling, white smooth stucco, limestone cladding, and synthetic cedar shake roofing to update the existing structure. This slide illustrates the proposed renderings from various angles. The areas outlined in red identify the new or expanded window and door openings. And tonight, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-1281, approving the project subject to conditions and a categorical exemption pursuant to CEQA. It should also be noted that the city has received 2 late letters of public correspondence in opposition to this request. Both letters have been posted to the agenda and should have been forwarded to the Planning Commission for consideration. This concludes my presentation. Both staff and the applicant team are available to address any questions.
Thank you, Kate. Are any questions of staff at this point? Mr. Whiten?
Yeah. This, of course, is unusual for us to be having design review on a residence. And the reason we are doing that is that there is a CUP required within this zone. And one of the things that's notable is that there is no landscape plan attached to the submittal. And is that because there is no landscape plan on record, and therefore there's no need to provide and submit a landscape plan?
That's correct. The design review triggers for a landscape plan is if the addition is over 15 feet in height, which this request does not exceed 15 feet. There's no approved landscape plan. They're not proposing any changes at this time. Therefore, a landscape plan was not submitted.
So whatever landscape and changes to the perimeter wall along the sidewalk would be ministerial as long as it meets the code requirements?
That's correct.
Both the materials and the height and so forth?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I have a question about the parking. There's no indication of parking spaces on the plan. Can you tell us a little about that?
They are actually proposing an uncovered parking space on the Glenary side. It would be parallel to Glenary.
Okay.
If you can see, it would be, I'm not sure that you can see my cursor, but it would be located right here.
So it's parallel to Glenary.
Correct.
Okay.
I believe today they pull into the spot and it overhangs onto the right of way. By parallel parking in that spot, it would be within property lines.
Okay. Just as a disclosure, I met on site with the applicant today, and we discussed this and looked at that condition and looked at the elm tree that's there, and it appears that the parking space doesn't encroach into the root zone of that tree. So will that be reviewed? Will the relationship of the parking spot and the concrete to the tree be reviewed by Public Works? Or if they've already signed off? They have.
Viewed this parking request.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other commissioner disclosures on this item? No. Me either. Okay. Commissioner Dubin.
Yeah, is this house under the Mills Act at all?
No, it is
It's
not.
not. And there's no historic, it was deemed not as historic, any kind of historic value or?
Correct. Based off of the assessment, the property would not be considered a historic resource.
Okay.
And just to clarify
yeah,
there,
sorry.
Commissioner, the city's architectural historian found that the existing property as currently developed does not meet the criteria or eligibility requirements for listing on the state or national registers. They did find that the existing beach cottage met one of the criteria for listing on the city's local register. But importantly, the applicant is not proposing to place the property on the city's register, which is a prerequisite to treating the property as a historic resource and being classified as a historic resource under the city's ordinance.
Okay. And well, maybe this is more for the applicant. I'll save that question. So thank you.
Commissioner Kellenberg, any questions of staff?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Yeah, and I was gonna have you run through the historic analysis a little bit more, but I think Anthony kind of clarified that again. We're having this ongoing debate amongst some community members about this whole issue, but it seems like it boils down to if the historic analysis does not find that it qualifies for the state or national register, if it did qualify for the state or national register, it would be a historic resource. It may qualify for the local Laguna Beach Historic Register based on that one criteria finding, but the only way it would be placed on the Laguna Beach Historic Register is at the consent of the owner. Correct? And if that doesn't happen, then it's not considered a historic resource under Laguna Beach Historic Register either. So that's where we're at, right?
Yes, that is accurate, Chair.
Okay. And is that issue still being litigated? And is there ongoing, has it?
So Chair, if I may, I'm not myself intimately working on that. I am vaguely familiar with some existing lawsuit dealing with the historicity of a particular property. I can't really opine on that super intelligently right now, only because I'm not involved in that, but I can for sure, look into that and get back to you all.
Even if that was the case, there's really nothing that we could do with that. So.
Correct.
Okay. I will open the public hearing to the applicant team. You have 5 minutes to let us know about your proposal and your proposed project.
Perfect. We are requesting approval of a conditional use permit and a design review for a proposed project at 634 Glen Eyrie. It's in the corner of Glen Eyrie and El Camino del Mar. I don't want to bother you with facts and figures because Kate covered that. But our request to establish and expand existing non-conforming residential use in the local business professional is consistent with surrounding properties, which are all residential uses pretty much. And this property was previously zoned village medium density. Originally constructed in 1936, 88 years ago, the proposed exterior facade will show some updates and add some characters to the home with new materials and new doors and windows. The historical resource assessment did not identify any historical significance for this property since it did not meet any of the criteria to be registered a historical resource, but described the original character as a board-and-batten beach cottage, which is retained and modernized with our proposed material scheme. The material scheme includes fiber cement board and batten, painted tricone black, grouted rough cut limestone, natural white oak entry door, smooth white stucco in the back, and synthetic cedar shake roofing throughout. The materials were chosen with a neighborhood character in mind, which has a variety of architectural styles. The additions are thoughtfully designed to provide architectural massing relief and match the existing roof lines. There is no increase to the maximum height of the structure. The one-story design of the home will negate impact to privacy and views, with neighboring properties being mostly two-story structures. The homeowners Mark and Kate Waite are passionate about restoring the house and contributing to the neighborhood. We look forward to discuss this project and answer any questions you guys might have.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicants at this point?
Did you bring material board with you, actual materials?
I didn't bring the actual material, but I think the pictures that we have, it's very simple, which we're using Hardy board and batten, painted black, and really the other material is just a limestone in the front. I actually talked to Susan yesterday, and it was short time for me to put the material together. But if it's necessary, I don't know.
It's always nice to physically put our hands on it. I'm looking at the whole, I'm a little curious as to how you picked this sort of, again, the black and white scheme of, and a lot of black, by the way. Can you explain that to me? Because I know it's kind of a trend right now to do black and white everything, but this seems to be a lot of black, and something that, maybe looks great on paper, but, a couple of years down the road, I mean, it just seems like it's just a very black aesthetic. And can you talk about that? Why you put so much of that instead of using maybe more of the smooth stucco or some of the cladded limestone or whatever you're using?
Well, we definitely wanted to stay with the board and batten look. We changed the material right at the entry to create an interest and kind of identify where the entry is. The white that you see in the back is really just because it's a very tiny courtyard, just to kind of lighten up the courtyard. As far as the pick of the color, quite honestly, when you have a white building, it actually stands out. And when you have something darker, gray, greens, blacks, they actually fit in the landscaping a little bit more, or you notice them less. So, and our client was also passionate about the color. It's really just not to make it this white shiny box in the corner.
I get that, but why use so much black?
I mean, we didn't want to introduce like two different tone board and battens like throughout the house. If we have one material, the material assigns a color, then we use the same color on the same material.
You're painting the board and batten black, right? It's a painted.
Correct.
So that's what I'm saying. I mean, you could still use board and batten to continue the aesthetic of the existing cottage, but have you considered less black? And it doesn't have to be white. It can be a lot of other things. But I'm just curious about that because
this was the color that we sort of gravitated towards, and we thought it's appropriate for the structure. What's that?
Can I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, sorry. So my wife is she couldn't make it here, but she's a decorator and designer. So she has a very, very keen eye for aesthetics and finishes. And she was the one worked with Atia to come up with the design, proposed design. And the reason we went with the color is obviously the current color is not attractive at all. There's if you've been past it, there's zero curb appeal to that house color right now. So we wanted to try, as we redesigned this, to come up with a more modernized finish, but still keep the cottage look and feel. And this is why we went this way. You're correct. Yes, this is kind of like the way, the dark color with the white, yes, that is more and more going on. There is no other home in the area that's finished this way. But it gave us the ability to modernize it, but still keep the character of the house as a cottage. And that's really the reason why she wanted to go that route.
okay.
And then the interior is going to be white, so it'll be brighter on the inside as a contrast.
Well, we don't look at the inside.
I understand.
And the roofing material is a synthetic shake of some sort, right?
So realistic, and I think for being close to the beach, it was very appropriate to use something synthetic.
It's also fireproof. That
Yeah.
was the other reason.
No,
why
I
we were-
understand that. Okay, okay, well, I'll let my other commissioners weigh in on this.
Yeah. Well, I did go out to the site and walk around, and the existing house is a dark house. It's kind of a dark blah brown. So I don't think darkness per se is inappropriate. In listening to my fellow commissioner and having sat up here just last meeting, and I shared this with the applicant, we reviewed something very similar to this. White stucco, black frame windows, and stone veneer. And there are lots of them now in Laguna. It's not unusual at all. My question would be, is there another deep color that might make your house a little more unique without sacrificing the aesthetic? And I'm very sensitive to people who obsess about design. But I guess that would be one way to, to sort of move away from what's become very trite, and not just here, but in inland. So that would be a thought. I have personal experience with those shakes, and they are very realistic looking. I do think it's a good choice for a beach cottage style, and of course it is fireproof. So other than that, we're not, other than this level of design, we're not reviewing any other design components here. So those are my comments.
Questions?
I think my questions have been answered. I just want to confirm that my reading of the plans is the entire Glen Eyrie elevation is black.
Yeah.
And the roof is black.
Correct.
Okay.
It's not exactly
It's
black.
not really black, the roof.
Oh.
It's some sort of like a darker, deeper shade of gray.
Charcoal.
Correct.
Yeah.
It looks pretty black on the.
This is why we like to see actual materials, because it makes a difference. And, pictures on a computer are always a little misleading.
Okay, that was my only question.
Okay, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes.
Please pass these out. These two letters were submitted this afternoon, and I assume you got them, but I'll hand them out anyway. Kathy Urka, again, is unable to attend. I hope you give me a little extra time in recognition of the fact that she can't be here tonight and she can't Zoom in, which she would have liked to do. This case is very similar to the case that you looked at 1110 Glen Eyrie Street, the Chris Abel building on the corner, where you asked about the historic character and was the commission allowed to consider it in their evaluation. And it was exactly the same situation where the historical report said that it was qualified as a local historic resource. And you were told that, well, it can't be a local historic resource because the owner doesn't put it on the register. That doesn't change the fact that it was found to be a historic resource by the consultant. And this transcript that I attached to the letter has your dialogue in there with the answer from the city attorney saying, yes, you can consider its historic significance. It's part of what you are allowed to review. And and you found it was a historic property and you denied the project. This is exactly the same, and you should have exactly the same conclusion. This is a beach cottage, which is so close to being the way it originally was. It's unbelievable that they don't appreciate how unique and how rare it is to have a beach cottage that's that original, and that they want to take that old siding off, that they don't like the color, that they don't like the windows, they don't like anything about this house. And it's baffling to me, because this could be the most beautiful historic restoration and an expression of how much we love Laguna Beach, that we respect its history and that we build on it, and we don't try to make it look like Architectural Digest. And I think you're getting to that point when you're questioning these colors and the triteness of these design changes that are being proposed. Kathy's letter says, the city errs in thinking that because the revised ordinance adds owner preference as a criterion for local historic status, properties that meet objective criteria for historical significance don't enjoy CEQA protections. That's what they say. Nothing in CEQA allows for owners to override a property's identified historic status any more than an owner can reject the identification of an endangered western burrowing owl on its property. Owner opposition does not erase identified environmental status or remove mandated environmental protections. The city attorney that's here is not involved in these discussions that have been going on since 2014. And yes, there is a lawsuit disputing the city's ordinance, but the discussion last time highlights that whole dilemma. CEQA still applies here, and they did find it was locally significant. So I urge you to set this aside and ask the applicant to rethink it, and in recognition of the historic qualities that this building has.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other speakers?
Chris Prelitz, 40-year resident. I wasn't going to speak, but Anne inspired me to. And I just one design comment of it. Everyone in Laguna loves the historic cottages, and we're sorry to see them leave and go. I think we all feel that way. What I think the change is that front entrance without having a roof overhang gives it that sort of contemporary fake facade feeling. And if that roof extended out over the entrance like the rest of the house does, I think it would feel much more like a cottage, like a Laguna cottage. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I think as an owner, having an overhang when you stand there at the front door when it rains is a really nice thing. So just something to consider. I think it would feel much more like a Laguna cottage than having that clipped back postmodern sort of feeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, back to the applicant team, if there's anything else you'd like to add or respond to any of the other comments from the public or whatever you'd like to say. You have 3 minutes.
I am not a historian and I'm not an expert, but we seek someone else's expertise and we got a report. They went out to the site. We have a long report that actually identifies that this house has no historical significance. The doors and windows have already been changed. If you walk by, they're sort of like mixed match of vinyl and some other material.
Enclosed porch.
Yes, the porch outside is already been enclosed throughout the years. Like when they purchased it, it was already enclosed. So the house has been touched, quite honestly, throughout the years. But that's my only comment. I don't know if you want to add something else.
No, I think that was one of the things when we bought the house, when we went into the city to ask about the historical significance, was there something we might have to deal with? And we went into the planning office and we're told, no, there's not. And then as we got into with the historian, as Atia mentioned, the windows, are a hodgepodge. There's vinyl clad windows that a previous owner put in. We have done no work to alter the exterior facade of the house at this point. And then the porch on the back, which Kate mentioned, a previous owner enclosed. not on the records as actual living space, even though it's been enclosed. So we're doing the right thing to include that as living space on the city records. But all of this work has altered the original cottage look and feel that everybody talks about and wants to preserve. And what we're trying to do is preserve that and then make it an attractive part of the community in Laguna Beach. And I think in its current state, it's not. Because it's just really, there's no curb appeal to it, but the potential is there, and that's what we're trying to do to add value to the community and to the neighborhood. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll close the public hearing and go to commissioner discussion and comments. Want to start? Anybody in particular want to start? Commissioner White?
I'd like to go back to this continuing niggling issue about the historic significance of this building. Is it or isn't it? I don't think we should be legislating this here. We need to be, I mean, the historic assessment appeared to be thorough and complete and has determined that this is not a historic resource. So is it or isn't it?
It is not a historic resource, Commissioner, and that is based on the analysis by the expert that the city retained, the architectural historian at GPA. There was an analysis that was performed to determine if the existing building was a historic resource. There was an extensive review done on the building permit history, also the identities of the individuals that have occupied this residence over the decades. And based on all of that analysis, they did conclude that it was not a historic resource. In their analysis, they're looking at both the city's criteria and then also state and national register criteria. And I'll just emphasize a point that I'd made previously, which is that in order to be considered a historic resource based on the city's local criteria, it is critical that the applicant voluntarily consent for the property to be placed on the city's register, and the applicant has not provided that voluntary consent.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that I believe it's at the state level that beach cottage is a property type, not an architectural style. So that wouldn't be, it's not an architectural style that, so therefore it wouldn't be considered historic. For
Can I, since you're on this topic, I believe everything you said is accurate, but there's always this second paragraph, and that is that the local historic analysis did identify that it was consistent with one of the criteria for making it a locally historically significant building. And that had to do with neighborhood, historic character and neighborhood context, or I forget what the actual one is. And it was on that basis that on the previous building, and it opened the door, so to speak, for us to take that under consideration. No, it's not technically a historical building that keeps the owners from doing certain things. That's true. But it's still, there was a finding by the historian that it did qualify under one of the criteria.
Didn't it qualify under the criteria of a notable architect and a notable example of a notable architect's work?
Yeah. So,
and this is not the case here.
But I believe the staff report said that it did qualify for under one of the criteria.
For the local criteria.
Local criteria.
It met
Yes.
one of the.
Yes, okay. I'm just making sure I didn't mistake that. So in I think in the mind of the commissioner, at least in my mind, that when we asked the legal opinion, that even though it isn't technically qualify as a historic building, can we, as representatives of the Planning Commission and representing the community interest, still take that under some consideration in our findings? And I believe the answer was yes, because that's a fact. It's documented, and we can take that under consideration.
Correct. So there's kind of two different, the way that I view them. So this, in response to that question, I don't believe it was last meeting, whatever it was, I thought that was teed up to me in the CEQA context. And so you are correct that there is something in the CEQA case law and its promulgating regulations that talks about a discretionary historical resource. So when a site does not qualify as either mandatory or presumptive historical resource, which that is the case here, obviously you all as the city decision makers may independently determine whether or not it should be treated as a historical resource just under CEQA. That doesn't mean you guys can force it on the register. That doesn't mean anything like that. And so in answering that question during the last meeting, that is what I was relying upon. And I believe it was to you who I said, yeah, you can consider anything in the record before you to potentially weigh that. That is what I thought was done during the last one. And as I said before, that is purely in the CEQA context. So it's not a, if you guys considered, if you guys made a similar finding, that wouldn't put it on a register, that wouldn't say it satisfies, but in that CEQA context, and I can elaborate more on that in the CEQA context, but I will shut up for now.
So I just wanted to not interrupt you, but just since you're on that topic, because I had a slightly different interpretation.
We have some wiggle room under CEQA, basically.
Yeah. Well, or just we have wiggle room in terms of what we think is appropriate, in relative to neighborhood context and so forth. Were you done or keep going? Yeah.
Well, are we still on questions? I think-
I'm done on the historic part.
Okay, well, do you
Does
have
anybody else want to?
Do you have any questions or?
No, I don't have questions. I thought we were having discussion.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
yeah.
Whoever wants to go.
Do you want to finish your thoughts or?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would go back to the visual impact issues, which would be the discussion about the design being a little predictable and dark and so forth, and wondering what flexibility there would be on the owner's part with the black color, just lightening the black color. It may be more into a core 10 color realm, something rich and meaningful, something rich. So there's the color part of it. I think that the public comment about the overhang as being a little more cottagey is a valid point. Might be a good consideration. If you want to pick up more cottage feeling, I think that was a good suggestion. And then second point, I would circle back to the issue of the landscape. You're not required to have a landscape. You can do nothing and just leave it bare the way it is. But there are some really terrible buildings on Glen Eyrie further down that we fortunately don't have to look at because they're big. There's a lot of landscape in front of them. I'm not putting you in that. I'm not dumping you into that group, but I'm saying I think landscape would really help filter the view of the building. And I'm sure you want to do it. It's just we don't have any assurance here that it will be done. And I think that would it would make a huge difference to the curb appeal that we're talking about up here. So I don't know what your thoughts are, if you have any ideas about it, and you're not legally required to submit a landscape plan.
I can assure you, we plan on doing something with the landscaping. You were there today, so you saw it is a hodgepodge of what prior owners have put in there. You've got cactus, you've got, a whole mess of different stuff going in there, and some of it that's just been cut back to nothing. Again, my wife she's a very visual person. But the first thing was we need to get the house done. And then being able to, at that point, visualize what we want to do. So for example, where you talked about the masonry wall along Glen Eyrie Street, that's an eyesore from the house. And so she wants to do some landscaping on the inside to soften the way that looks from the house. And then around the outside of the exterior, doing some other, she loves roses, and we know they grow really well here. So putting rose bushes in there and some other, and lavender is another, plant that she wants to. So a lot of what you already see in landscaping here in Southern California, just a matter of putting the time into doing it. And so we're trying to tackle first things first. And, the house is the big project right now. But we definitely are going to do something about the landscaping because neither one of us like it. We're just having to live with it as it is for now.
Okay, those are my comments for now.
Commissioner Dubin?
Well, I never like to get too into the weeds on other people's aesthetics, although it's a big part of who, excuse me, who I am as an artist and whatever. But when I first saw the staff report with the images of the cottage, it just, I don't find that an all black house recedes or disappears. It's just, it really bumped me to see that. And I was just wondering if there's any, I'm not so bugged by the color of the roof. I think there's just so much black on the house itself. And I'm just wondering if you might consider an alternative color for the board and batten part of the house, because it just seems really out of place. And it's like you're trying to take this, this potentially really quaint 1938 cottage and turn it into something that is trying to be modern when it's not, instead of embracing the aesthetic in a way that enhances it. It feels like you're trying to disguise it as much as possible without, obviously not changing, the footprint of the house. But it just seems like you're trying to push back on the embracement of what this is by your color choices. And I again, you're not, necessarily obligated to take that into consideration, but it would be nice to maybe consider, at least for the board and batten part of the house, some other color that maybe speaks to that era of beach cottage. It doesn't have to be a crummy brown color or a barn red or something, but I mean, there's a lot to choose from out there, and I wouldn't want to tell you what that is, but I would just ask that you potentially consider a color change for the bulk of the house there, because it just seems like it's not doing what you think it's doing. It feels very out of place for that kind of house. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Kellenberg.
Yeah, in my mind, there's two issues here. One is this the same situation that we had on the previous, one of the previous cases? And I appreciate the argument, that maybe it is, but I do see it differently. That particular project had very obvious, dramatic, strong historic crafting and architectural elements that I think 9 out of 10 people would say that should be saved. I mean, that's like really important to the historic character of the building and the neighborhood. And I'm struggling finding that on this. And I understand from a technical point of view, yes, it's a certain prototype of history that it's here we go again, losing another, historic type house. But in my mind, I think it's kind of already been lost in a way. I mean, the changes that have been made, and I think what we're seeing here is an attempt to bring it forward. It's still going to feel cottage-ish just because of the scale and the massing and so forth. And so my tendency is not to dig in on it, the historic, preserving it in a pure restoration kind of point of view. I can't go there on this one as I could on the other one. On the other hand, I just, to me, in looking at the neighborhood, having an 100% black elevation, on Glen Eyrie, and an almost black roof will jump out a mile and be a harsh, sort of presence on the street. And I think, I would suggest, I agree with the other commissioners that in my mind, there's a couple of options. One is to rethink the field color to where it's not quite as black. The second option would be to rethink the proportion of white and black to where if there was a black color being used, that it'd not be as dominant. It'd be like 50% or less, or to where there's more of a balance between the light and the dark. My tendency is though that the white, we've gone here on previous buildings. If it's white, super white, it'd be nicer if it was a little bit more off-white, so it's not quite as bright and reflective. So I'm supportive of the project, but not in its current state in terms of the color blocking, that's being used.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Kellenberg in terms of the historic analysis that, this is an old building. It was from the early 30s. So because of its age, it had to go through this pretty extensive historic analysis, which they're always interested to read because it's got a lot of interesting history about the previous owners and what it cost to build a house in 1936, including buying the lot, which is a lot different than we're at today. But I do agree that we do, as planning commissioners, have some discretion under CEQA to do kind of our own independent historic analysis a little bit. But again, I agree with Commissioner Kellenberg that the other project that we're all alluding to from, within the last couple months was different. It had much more going for it in terms of some of the historic background on it. It was designed by a prominent local architect who has a long history here in town. So it was associated with a prominent architect. Really, out of this analysis, all they came up with really is saying this was an example of a beach cottage, that's almost everything in Laguna Beach in the 20s and 30s was a beach cottage. So that's not super unique in and of itself. It didn't go on to say that it was a particularly architecturally excellent example of a beach cottage or anything like that. And because it was never considered a historic resource or put on any register of any sort over the years, that the previous owners were allowed to make changes to it that probably wouldn't have been allowed, or they would have been held to a different standard in doing any kind of changes if it had been on some sort of register. Because of that, the modifications were made, like you were saying, with windows and doors and other things being changed over the years. They're not, real wood windows anymore. They're not, what was there in the 30s. So it has lost a lot of its historic nature and architectural integrity over the years, to the point that I don't see this as rising to the level where I would say, I'm going to make my own independent judgment here and put this in my mind at a higher level of historic integrity or meaningfulness. So then what we're being asked to do is a residential design review here, which, as was said, is not common for us. It's because this is having to have a conditional use permit that we are doing this design review. But I was on the design review board for many years, and so I'm familiar with what we would go through on residential design review projects. And typically the sticking points on those projects between neighbors and people who were weighing in on it were privacy issues, view equity issues, neighborhood compatibility issues. None of that is really coming into play here, with the potential exception of neighborhood compatibility. But so I feel as the staff report analysis of the design review criteria was all right on, and I agree with all that analysis. I agree that no coastal development permit is required for this. that I agree that it's the CEQA exemption is appropriate, and I could make the conditional use permit findings that are required and as suggested in the staff report. So then it comes down to, there's been small areas of addition that have been added, trying to permit some legal, illegal previous things that happened with the project, this property. Regarding the color that's been chosen here, I'm not feeling as strongly as my fellow commissioners are about that. I really want to, unless something is really very egregious in my mind, I'm really willing to defer to an applicant's wishes for the most part. I think and again, because it's not historic, you don't really have to do this. I think it was kind of a valid point about the entry area and the door, and the fact that roof and having the tight fascia and no overhang or eave there is, it's a little bit out of context with everything else that's going on in the building. But even that, I'm not going to make a big issue about that. So I would defer to the applicant. I'm not going to to request that you change the color. However, it sounds as though some of my fellow commissioners feel more strongly about it. So I would be willing to support the project as it's currently proposed. So I will defer to my fellow commissioners for further discussion on what they may be thinking here. I'm willing to reopen the public hearing so they can ask you questions and we can have a little bit of back and forth here and see what, if anything, you are willing to consider in terms of that color issue.
Could you reopen the hearing?
Yes, I will reopen the public hearing.
You've heard the comments from the commissioners, and the two issues are the color and perhaps the addition of some type of overhang at the front door. Do you want to respond?
Okay, yeah, so the overhang is not, a concern. We can easily accommodate that. The other thing which we did, and it doesn't really show up well on the renderings, unless you look at it closely, is, the entryway is maintaining the aesthetic of a beach cottage. It's a Dutch door, so that, the top and the bottom can open independently. And then you come into a little, I want to call it entryway, shall we say, and then you enter the house. So short of having that whole area open, it is somewhat of an overhang with the Dutch door entry. But if it was a concern that we extend it out a little farther from the facade of the front of the house, that is something we can easily do, because that whole area is going to be new to the structure anyway. As far as color, we looked at our preferences to be a darker color. If you've been in that area, all of the homes are white, cream, a light tan color, sand color, blue. So what we're trying to do is not be different and stand out, but let's not look at, what everybody's done in the past just to conform. And if we're going to make this house look nice, let's make it look nice. And really
I have a feeling that we don't have anything against a dark color.
Okay. Well, you're asking me if we would consider a change of a color.
Yeah, and no, I think we're saying that it's the black.
Right.
That's the issue, and I think other rich, and I think it was suggested that a dark color that's got rich, some richer pigment in it might be all that we're kind of looking for.
Yeah, and that's great. We weren't set on black to begin with. It's just we had to make a decision when we got everything together to submit, and we thought black would be a good color. But even if you look at the gray here, just something that's a little lighter and not having it, dark black all around. We're willing to work and come up with a color as far as that goes.
In the rendering, you can see the existing overhang. That's just depicting the existing overhang. It's really not that much overhang on. Do you have the existing house picture, Kate? I think.
With the front entry?
Yeah, with the gable, just so that we can see the overhangs. You had it.
I
at
think the
beginning
idea
of
is
the
not to have a
report.
super deep overhang, but just sort of match maybe what's
Something.
already, so it's harmonious with the rest of the house.
Yeah, because the one that's on there right now probably goes out about 2 feet and it's held up by a couple of 2x4s.
I don't think we're looking
That
at
was
something
code
that,
back
that
then.
deep. No. Yeah.
It's more on the gable end.
Yeah.
But we can certainly match that style.
Do we know anything about the original color of the house?
We don't even know if that's the original color.
No, that's what I'm asking essentially. We don't know. Okay. So how do we condition this sort of situation if we were to condition it?
Depends on what the planning commission wants to approve this evening, if it's ready to approve. If there is a shade range that the planning commission wants to provide, or if there's a specific color, define it by light, medium, dark shade. You do have options, and it's up to the consensus of the planning commission. But if you do provide that direction through a condition of approval, staff can verify that it's implemented with the building plan check process.
And then, Chair, I would just add, we would want to avoid any type of subjective condition that planning manager Vieira or staff would have to kind of attempt to get in your guys' heads and say, this is kind of what they meant. So echoing his sentiment, the greater amount of specificity, the better.
All right, team.
George, do you want to have some
Did you bring your
expert
color wheel?
comments?
I have some thoughts, but again, it's like me telling the property owner what I think is appropriate is, may be off-putting to them, but I don't mind, if you want to do a very dark color, I'm just bumped by the black, and maybe if it's a dark sage green or a dark, as Commissioner Whiten said, a dark rust color or something that would black goes and with your white entryway. There's a couple of colors that always come to mind, and they're very earthy and they can be dark as you want them to be, but they will actually give you some differentiation from, the black, their dark charcoal roof, a color, and then your stonework on the entryway. To me, I think it would aesthetically be very pleasing, but, that's my personal opinion, and it's, may not be the one that you would share, but those are the two things that sort of come to mind for me personally in terms of, thinking back, we're not in historic world, but if you think about beach cottages from that era, they tended to use those kinds of colors, whether it was a dark sort of sagey green, a rust color is some kind of a grayed out blue, color. Those seem, when I see old beach cottages, whether it's here in Laguna or elsewhere, that sort of have retained, the original colors. Those are ones that sort of pop into my mind, so I don't want to say that, you have to do that in order to get approval, but it would be, something to maybe consider as a condition of approval.
Yeah, I agree. The dark is fine. It's just the blackout black.
Is it as simple as saying anything but black?
Maybe. Just a deep shade of a color, any color except black. No.
French gray, like a warmer gray color, but not black.
I think you want to complement, the stonework, which does have a little bit of, some of the natural stone has a little bit of color in it, so it's not just white stone.
Correct.
And you have this charcoal roof. I think, if you went like some kind of dark gray, it's just going to look a little battleshipy to me, and I think you would enhance the other two elements by using
A different color.
an actual color versus, going white, gray, black, it's just, I don't think it's very, again, I don't like to dive too far into my personal aesthetic, but I just think, a dark color that's got a little warmth to it, or where you see a little color that would complement the black and the white. I think it would, it would change the whole complexion of some of the more updated elements of the property
Yeah,
without changing any of the other aesthetics or the window changes or doors or any of that stuff.
Okay. Like green, black, green with a lot of black in it.
Okay.
But actually, a dark green was one of the colors my wife was
Yeah,
considering.
I like that.
So that's,
It's very strong and
Yeah.
handsome.
And I think it would complement the roof color.
Yeah, it is good with the stone too. But I agree, pretty much any color. Except.
Okay, so are you guys basically okay with those suggestions? Okay, so if somebody could make a motion with the inclusion of those conditions?
Where is?
3.4, 2.3, I'm
Let me
5.3.
get the right one this time. Okay.
I move.
Okay.
Oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I move we adopt a resolution approving conditional use permit 24-1913 and design review 24-2013 and finding said action exempt from CEQA with the two following conditions. The first being that a overhang that is similar in character to those found elsewhere on the building are added to the entry, and that the black field color is revised to a different color that is fine to be dark, but shall not be and can be any color other than black or dark gray.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg?
Yes.
Chair Sadler?
Yes. Right, motion passes, and there's a 14-day right of appeal to the city council for anyone who does not agree with that decision. Thank you. Okay, we will be. Oh, and before we move on to our next item, 5.4, Commissioner Whiten needs to recuse herself from this particular item.
And then, Chair, just for the record, it does require, it's due to the proximity to Commissioner Whiten's residence is the reason for her recusal.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Due to her location of having real property within 500 feet of this property. So this item 5.4 is a variance request 24-0590 at 1536 Morningside Drive. And Associate Planner Garrett Wank will be providing our staff report on this item tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission and members of the public. Item 5.4 is a request for a variance at 1536 Morningside Drive, located in the R1 zone. The 13,866 square foot lot is located in Bluebird Canyon and is currently undeveloped. On May 19th, 2004, the City Council approved Lot Line Adjustment 04-01, which reconfigured the lot lines associated with 4 legal building sites. 2 lots maintain access from Morningside Drive, and 2 lots maintain access from Bluebird Canyon Drive. On May 9th, 2024, the Design Review Board held a public hearing to consider the design review and coastal development permit applications for the proposed new single-family dwelling. The Design Review Board voted 3-1 to approve Design Review 23-0919 and Coastal Development Permit 23-0921 and added 3 project-specific conditions of approval. The Design Review Board's approval of the single-family home was contingent upon approval by the Planning Commission for indirect access and City Council for an access easement over the city-owned lot, which will include entering into a public benefit agreement. A portion of the street frontage immediately adjacent to 1536 Morningside Drive is privately owned, as shown here in red, and a portion is city-owned, as shown here in blue. The proposed project includes a variance to obtain indirect access and construct improvements across the city-owned parcel. The area of proposed access is shown here in green. An easement will be proposed immediately over the area of the city-owned lot that will support the driveway after the Planning Commission's action on this application. Staff believes that all variance findings can be made as the prior lot reconfiguration has created special circumstance on the property, and the indirect access variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right of the applicant. The granting of the variance will not be detrimental to public health, safety, convenience, and welfare, in that the development of a driveway and on-street parking space will not impact existing vehicular circulation. The project has been conditioned such that the development of the subject lot is contingent upon the applicant receiving approval from City Council for an access easement over the city-owned lot. Condition 18 has been revised as shown on the screen to clarify that the access variance is to be utilized by one single-family dwelling and one accessory dwelling unit on the subject property. Staff has received one letter in support of the project and 2 letters of concern from the adjacent property owners at 1526 Morningside Drive and 1560 Bluebird Canyon Drive. One neighbor letter identified concerns regarding the building site status of the subject property. Staff has conducted research through the property file, including the staff reports for the lot line adjustments. These reports indicate that 2 of the properties are to be accessed from Morningside, and the other 2 are to be accessed from Bluebird Canyon. There was a report related to one of the prior adjustments assessing lot area width and depth as required by the zone. These reports do not note that the building site status would be removed as a result of the lot line adjustment. Regardless, this access variance would provide the necessary access for future development of this lot. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution approving variance 24-0590 and finding said action exempt from CEQA. That will conclude my staff summary, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Garrett. Any disclosures on this item before we start?
Yes, I met with the applicant and one of the neighbors.
Okay.
And I spoke with the applicant over the telephone.
I didn't speak with anybody. All right. Any questions for staff at this point?
I have a procedural question. And I'm just curious about this. You know, DRB already reviewed the actual house project and approved it. And I know some of the letters, opposition letters or concern letters that we received, where one was talking a lot about view equity and all that stuff. And I'm apparently not understanding that we're not, that's sort of a done deal at this point, that DRB already approved the project, and I'm sure dealt with concerns of the neighbors in terms of view equity and all that stuff. But my procedural question is, because this indirect access variance was going to be needed for the project to actually move forward, why was that not brought to us before it went to DRB?
I believe the intent of bringing design review forward first was to identify the location of the driveway for the specifics of the variance request.
Okay.
Right, and so if I may add, this project is somewhat unique in that they needed this 2-step process, right? They needed design review, and then needed to come to you all for the variance, and then City Council for potential easement. The reason why we let design review kind of go first is they kind of get into the weeds, so to speak, of the actual project.
Right.
Where is this going to be located? What we didn't want to do is basically put this process first. You guys do the variance and maybe an easement agreement, and then the DRB's hands are tied because, hey, this is where it has to go. And so
I see. Okay.
that's why that's why
I was just curious because it felt a little cart before the horse to me.
No,
And if I may add one thought, Commissioner, usually the Design Review Board also has authority over variance applications.
Okay.
What's unique here is that the city municipal code specifically indicates that an access variance is subject to Planning Commission approval in all instances.
Okay.
Although this is a single family project that went before the board, ordinarily any variances associated with that type of an application would be subject to their review and approval concurrent with the design review application. Because the code requires that 2 separate bodies approve or decide on each application. That is why this is now a 2-step procedure.
Okay.
And then just to add that design review board review and approval is explicitly conditioned on successfully, applying for this process as well as an easement agreement. So as of right now, they have no ability to build until they go through.
Yeah, I get that.
They go through this process.
Okay. Thanks.
I had a question, Garrett, on page 3 of the staff report under the site history, where it starts talking about this lot line adjustment, which happened in 2004. So I guess one question, what precipitated the lot line adjustment? Why was the lot line adjustment ever done? Was it the fact that somebody owned a large parcel and they just wanted to split it into multiple parcels so they could and sell them off individually?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can speak to, I at least have not in my research identified the reasoning for that specific lot line adjustment. There were originally 2 parcels that were included and then separated into these ultimately 4 legal building sites. And so that certainly may have been the reasoning.
Okay. And in that site history, on the second sentence there at the top of page 3, it says 2 lots maintain access from Morningside and 2 lots maintain access from Bluebird Canyon Drive. But we're talking about a lot that doesn't have access from Morningside that requires an indirect access variance. So one of the lots doesn't have access from Morningside. One of the lots doesn't have access.
If I may clarify that, Chair.
Okay.
The 2004 lot line adjustment that you were alluding to, that application did not increase the number of lots. A lot line adjustment procedure wouldn't be the appropriate mechanism to subdivide a property. But as part of that agenda report to the City Council, it was explained that with this lot line adjustment, 2 lots would take access from Bluebird Canyon Drive and 2 lots would take access from Morningside Drive. That was contemplated. Now, it is correct to say that that access cannot be effectuated without the granting of an indirect access variance, because based on the existing conditions, there is this city-owned parcel, Lot A, that prevents direct access, as that term is defined, between the applicant's lot and the existing right-of-way.
Okay. And then I just wanted, I'm sure I read it somewhere in the staff report, but I just wanted to have it clarified that, I mean, because in the past, when the Planning Commission is tasked with evaluating abandonment of city properties, that, typically we have to make a finding that that there would be no further purpose for the city for that property, and therefore, it could be abandoned. We have kind of a similar situation here where, we're going to be granting, potentially granting a variance and an easement across this city parcel. But as far as the city's concerned at this point, there's no plans for any kind of future use in which, basically giving up this easement would prevent some future city projects such as undergrounding utilities or widening the road or anything like that.
That's correct. I had spoken with Public Works to confirm that there are no plans for this property. And they did confirm that the property is not considered to be a right-of-way. There's no current plans for extending or widening the road. And so at this point, there's no plan for what that property would be utilized for.
Oh, okay. And so how did, was this always city property and this little strip of land, or was this part of the lot line adjustment previously that created the city property, or has it always been city property?
That much wasn't clear in the lot line adjustment research that I had done. The lot line adjustments actually don't show the city property on there. So I'm not sure what the original ownership might have been.
Okay. And another question I had was, and I guess, really our role here is limited, even though we've been given the full set of plans and everything. We're not delving into and redoing design review. We're not relooking at what the design review board has already done. However, I was trying to get a sense of, when it was mentioned that it was 3-1, it's like, well, why did one person vote against it or whatever? And there was no minutes attached from that previous design review board meeting. And then I went online to go back to that May date, And for some reason, there is no minutes for that meeting. Is there any explanation for that?
I don't know if we happen to know if minutes were adopted for that meeting. Since they're not on the website, I'll go ahead and assume that perhaps those minutes were not adopted at this time.
Okay, I mean, are they under that big of a backlog on doing the minutes for the DRB now, or?
I don't happen to know, Chair.
Okay. I think that answers my questions for now. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. So a clarification, if you go back to your drawing that shows the yellow and the red or the different colors of what's private and what's city, there is a frontage of this lot that isn't part of city property, right?
Another little strip, yeah, I think so.
Yes, that's correct. The area in red here is.
The
a
area in
strip.
red, who owns that?
That's owned by Ed Riahi, the adjacent neighboring property owner at 1526 Morningside.
Okay, I see. I was thinking, well, maybe it does have access, but it doesn't. That's a bit of a spite strip, or looks like there. And my other question, and I think you answered it, is, why does the city own this property? And because there was so in one of the letters, they implied that it was for future widening of the road. And so you've confirmed that is not the case. It was also, correct?
Yes, I've confirmed there are no current plans to widen the road.
And there was also a position taken that if this land is provided to the applicant, that they should provide parking spaces, widen the road and provide parking spaces the full width of the lot. So Public Works is not taking any position on that, doing that, correct?
To my knowledge, Public Works has not opined on that requirement.
Okay.
Great. And then if I may, so the entitlement before you all is once again just the indirect access variance. Obviously, this is complicated by the fact that it is city-owned property. As it pertains to the potential use of that area, as it pertains to, hey, what would the city potentially look to get out of the property owner? Likely a better analysis for the city council and potentially executing or finalizing that easement. I just want to be sure that the variance before you all tonight is just for that indirect access. We are somewhat, constrained by, nexus and rough proportionality. So any, large conditions on it, such as.
Not proposing any, just trying to be informed.
Understood. Thank you.
I think that's my last question.
I have one more quick one. In terms of the rest of the city-owned property, I know in my conversation with the applicant that the city apparently doesn't do any maintenance on that property, even though it's owned by the city. Is there any mention from Public Works at all of doing any level of maintenance on that, or is that going to be left to the property and the adjacent properties, this application property, as well as whatever is next to it, to do any kind of cleanup on that whatever the leftover portion of city-owned property is?
That's not something that I had checked into with Public Works, but I'd be more than happy to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Garrett, I don't know, this last was just out of curiosity. I'm trying to remember. I remember, and this has got to be over 10 years ago now, when I was on the design review board, there was previous proposal for part of this overall larger piece of land here. And I can't remember whatever was the final disposition of that. Did it, I believe it was, as I'm looking at this lot line adjustment, it was the larger parcel 1. That's still vacant. Nothing was ever built there, correct? Because I remember there's a lot of discussion, and I believe that they were going to try to take access from Bluebird Canyon Road and not Morningside Drive. And I don't know. I guess it doesn't really relate to this project here right now. So I just wasn't sure if you had any information about that.
I have a little bit of information about the other Morningside / Bluebird properties in their development. So the Let me share my screen here. So here we have the subject property. It's labeled here as 1568 Morningside in the GIS. The adjacent property at 1526 Morningside is owned by Ed Riahi and was approved through design review. These two properties at the rear are currently in the process of going through and will be going to design review shortly, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other further questions? No. To the applicant team. Good evening. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Prelitz, 40-year resident, representing the Cover and Kane families who want to build a home for themselves. They've lived in Laguna for quite a while. Sort of a quick history. I started this project 5 years ago with a prior owner. We met with the planning department, and they advised me the direction to go, which was DRB first and then planning. They said this could be an abandonment. We could petition for the abandonment, but at that time, the thought was that this was a faster process. In hindsight, taking 5 years, we should have gone for the abandonment. And we have Public Works has already looked at it and approved it. We have Fire Department approval. We have done a biological assessment. There is no endangered or important habitat on the property. It is a 35-degree hill. So widening that road would take huge retaining walls to do a wider road. So the city is not going to do that. The mention was of one vote against the project at DRB. That was because that DRB person was a last-minute substitution and was not able to meet with us at 2 points. And at the same time, at the DRB meeting, we did an adjustment on the height of 2 feet to lower it down to appease a neighbor's view. And Ms. Neve at that time said, I just have a process of not approving anything of height lowering that hasn't been surveyed, even though it had been surveyed twice. So she voted against it, and thinking all other aspects, if she had met with us on site, if she had had more time to see the whole thing, and in her mind, if she had seen it surveyed, she would have been supportive as well. We have 100% support of the entire neighborhood that lives there because it was a 5-year process, appeasing views, appeasing privacy issues. Every neighbor that lives on the site wrote letters of support or showed up in support. The only people opposing it are the 2 new developers adjacent to us, and they've actually appealed the project, and they are the ones that wrote letters tonight. So we hope that we've satisfied everything that Planning Commission needs, that the Planning Department needs, and just look for your support in this small little easement. We probably will go for abandonment later on, but this will get us through the process. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Okay, I will open this to members of the public. Anybody who wishes to speak on this project, please come forward. Give us your name.
Good evening. I'm Ed Riahi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I own the adjoining property at 1526 Morningside Drive, which sits essentially upstream of the subject parcel. I can shed light on a couple of things that came up. One is the city-owned parcel was dedicated to city as part of the initial subdivision. Morningside Drive has a 40 feet right-of-way width throughout, except this block. This particular block has 35 feet, and it was always intended for an additional 5 feet to be added to make it a uniform 40 feet width throughout the entire loop of Morningside Drive. So that's just a side note. As far as the subject parcel, and I'll add one more thing. I appreciate the clarification that was provided that easement is not part of the proceeding tonight. This is merely as I understand it, is a variance application to cross that future easement if in fact city grants it. At this point, there is no application pending before City Council for any type of abandonment or any type of permanent easement across city's parcel. This piece of property, subject property, is a landlocked parcel. We have many of them within the city. For the 30 years I've lived in this town, it's been a standard practice of the city not to promote or facilitate construction on landlocked parcels. Moreover, under California Subdivision Map Act and City of Laguna Beach Municipal Code, a landlocked parcel is not entitled to any kind of improvement. The first thing that needs to get resolved here is resolution on this landlocked status of this parcel. And that is the elephant in the room, and that's to go to city council, petition the city and gain access across its property if city grants it. There's no guarantees that they would. Personally, I would not bet on that. But that access needs to be secured, and subsequent to that, the other events can take place. With respect to design review approval of this parcel, that approval is subject of 2 appeals, and city council has placed that on hold indefinitely. There's no hearings scheduled at this point till the matter is resolved. So the notion of this variance is premature in the absence of ensuring that there's access to it. As far as the variance, findings number 3 and 4 cannot be made. Number 3 is that if variance is granted, it should not injure anybody else, but it's going to injure me. I provided you pictorial evidence that this 4-story house that is proposed for this parcel, the upper level of it blocks my Catalina view. And lastly, number 4, if I may finish, is number 4 finding is that it should not deviate from municipal code. What it does, because municipal code does not allow entitling a landlocked parcel. So I've been advised that this matter would not stand judicial review in the sequence that is proposed and is on its course. I propose that this matter be tabled till access can be secured, and then it can go through its course. But first of all, city council has to speak on the appeal, because if city council rejects the approval of design review, this whole matter is moot. It's going to send it back to design review, as they did with my application on the objection of the appellant, on the objection of the applicants here. So, we're putting the cart before the horse, creating liability for a city, creating something I've never seen in my 30 years in this town in such an out-of-sequence proceeding. I don't understand the rationale behind it. What's the reasoning? We have this well-established process here that we have all followed for years, and this property needs to go and get access. Once it has access to the street, it can become a legal parcel. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is David Journeys. Can you please give this to the other members, and I'll reserve my time until they have. Point of order, the applicant did not appeal Mr. Riahi's property. It was the neighbors across the street. Thank you. Bottom line is, I've had a set of questions, and ultimately, some of what I heard from Mr. Vera and Mr. Wank is kind of laughable. When I was in my DMT for my project at 1560, Public Works asked me to put 5 parking spots on my lot, which I don't require an easement. Look, this property, it is a non-buildable lot, period. It should have gotten an easement to grant access across this lot. This is unapprovable on the face of it for DRB, and that's why the chair at the time rejected, because it did not have the variance or the easement required to even be considered. And why is this application, only for an indirect variance? Because if that easement was added to this, it would have been done through a process of determining what was that lot for in the first place. It was created in 1964 when the lots across the street were created, and it was specifically reserved for widening. That's a single-loaded street. These guys are the first ones to put a property on it to make it a doubly loaded street. It needs to be widened, regardless of what the current plans that Public Works has. And look, there's no reference in this application, the staff report, about that intended use. And really, there's been very little research. If I know exactly when it was created, clearly The city has not done the research they need to ensure that they understand the intended use of that property. You know, why is there no easement in this grant application? Look, ultimately, that grant makes this property worth a lot. I paid a lot of money for my lot up on the hill. These guys paid a lot less, and it's because the thing is not literally legally a buildable lot. They needed to go through this process with the commission here, and by sending it through DRB, it created two problems. One, it allowed them to justify putting a large driveway on their property, which undermines the hillside down from mine and forces their home at the back and up a whole 4 floors. Even the DRB's staff report said to remove the top floor, which both Mr. Riahi and I agreed with, and I've tried extensively to make, you know, a negotiated settlement with the Covers to do that lowering in some fashion, even offering them a view equity easement in exchange. But rebuked. And of course, Mr. Prelitz has said they designed this 5 years ago. Yeah, I bought the property less than a year ago, and I'm already about to go to DRB, and I've had no consideration about any changes once my design was complete, which was highly considerate of everybody else's, including the other neighbor. And look, at the end of the day, granting access to this will set a bad precedent because it's basically giving away free rights to the property that they have there, that the city owns. And you know, when you have one of the other the commissioners here owning the property next door that borders my property, their property, and this lot, you now are effectively given that member just the same amount of rights. Seriously? Just the same amount of rights as you're basically giving here for free to access that lower road. So I ask simply that it be considered first whether or not the road should be extended, and this should be a consideration for the neighbors here to get access, period, as an easement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any additional speakers? Seeing none, back to the applicant team if you have anything to add.
Yes, there we go.
There you go.
Joe Cover, I'm the applicant, the owner, along with my father-in-law, John Kane. And just a couple of points to hit on there. Yeah, Ed, we did not repeal your plan, as David mentioned. I think, you know, this whole meeting obviously is related to access. So the fact that we're trying to get access is something that I think you all are trying to figure out for us. We know that this whole idea of an easement access variance has been around forever. It was always just at what point in time does it insert into the whole process? And so at staff's you know, guys and through the prior city planning managers as well, was addressed through the design review board process. And that's obviously why we're here. And will be addressed again by the city council. As they mentioned, we're going through appeal. City council obviously will also take a look at their design review board claims, and they'll have a fair shot at discussing those at that point in time. So, you know, David, as far as like the whole ownership thing of his parcel being so far, you know, more expensive than ours because of the value of not having this little city-owned parcel is silly. He bought his lot 3 years later than us. It's larger and it has a full ocean view, whereas ours does not. Ours has a small ocean view over some trees west side, as well as through Rimrock Canyon to the north side. So it's a very, very different lot. He also is designing a house that he can build 10 to 15 feet higher than ours without even really, you know, doing anything else besides just complying with his normal standards. So designer, you know, his view equity is obviously consideration when he talks about his pricing. And I would say as well, just for that the whole access standpoint of why that lot, why that parcel is there by the city is also a little bit silly because Ed had the same parcel at one point in time that was also adjacent to his lot and also now has ownership of that parcel. So if it was the condition of the city just not to develop that hillside at all, then why does he have that ownership parcel there that would have also been adjacent parcel with ours? And should not we also have the same ability to access out and again, enjoy what Garrett has mentioned as far as access to a property that is buildable? I think the city staffing report does a great job of suggesting that there's obviously precedent for us to have access to our lot, as all the other lots on that knoll do, that it does not impose any detriment to public health or issues there, and that it's not contrary to zoning ordinance or the general plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will close the public hearing and we'll go to board member comments, discussion.
I have some questions of staff.
Questions.
It was represented that that this whole proceeding is illegal because access hasn't already been granted by the city council. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So I respectfully disagree with that statement. The DRB's approval was explicitly conditioned, basically saying you must get that in order to build anything on there. As I stated previously, the reason why the staff took it in the order for which it did was that DRB is typically the entity in this instance that really gets into the weeds of the project about where things are located, where they're going to go. And for that reason, that's why we didn't say, go get a easement first, because one of the typical questions.
My question is a little different than that. It wasn't the order issue.
Yeah.
It was that that we should not be able to give an easement at this point without the council providing some other level of access to the lot.
So there is no easement before you all tonight. The only thing that is before you tonight is the variance for indirect access.
Right.
And so I'm not really.
Did you not hear the argument? I was just curious if you wanted to comment on it.
Go ahead.
If I may attempt to answer that question, Commissioner, the draft resolution before you this evening, as modified per the revised condition 18 that Associate Planner Garrett Wank had on the screen earlier, does include a clause that would require that the City Council approve an access easement over the city-owned lot. So that has been contemplated in this entire process. There is the design review component, the design of the single-family home and the associated access between their lot and the existing city right-of-way. There's the component before you tonight, which is the access variance itself. And then the City Council will consider whether or not it chooses to grant an easement.
And that can occur after, our decision tonight. It doesn't have to be reversed, because I thought that was the argument that was being
No,
made.
it does
Okay,
not.
perfect. Other question is, what is the current zoning? This is zoned residential. It's not open space, right?
Correct. This is zoned R1.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody in particular like to start?
Yeah, I'll start by commenting on several years ago we had kind of a similar situation with a theoretical buildable lot. This was up off of Sky. I don't know. It was way up on the hill somewhere, and there was in order to access the lot, there was a strip of land that was 1 foot by like 30 feet. That was, I believe it was city-owned property, and we were asked to make a variance determination to allow access across that 1 foot strip so that the property owner could theoretically build this home. Now, the home site itself was in an extreme high fire zone as well as a high value habitat area. It was down in a canyon and was basically almost an impossible thing to do. However, the Planning Commission at the time was able to make all the findings to grant the variance, the access variance, so that, the property owner could either potentially sell the property or develop it one way or the other. And I'm not sure what happened to that. So there has been some precedent in the past, at least since I've been on planning for these kinds of things. So as far as any other comments, I can make the findings for the indirect access variance to the applicant property, and I can find the project exempt from CEQA review because the Design Review Board in their review deemed it the project exempt already. So there's no reason to view that otherwise. So that's my comments.
Well, I'll go next. A little bit of an unusual process, the way it's gone through. However, I believe that it's gone through the process that it had to go through. That the indirect access point couldn't really be determined without trying to determine what the project was first. And so it was appropriate for this to go to DRB to determine what is the project and what would the approvable project be. And then once that was done, typically the design review board would be in charge of granting variances. However, in this particular case, because of the city's municipal code, the planning commission is tasked with doing that. The city council has set aside moving forward on any appeal because they don't know if there's going to be a project. If the planning commission doesn't grant a variance, then the city council cannot grant an easement. So if there would be no project and the whole thing would be moot. So why would they spend any time or energy going through an appeal process if it's all contingent upon what we do here tonight? So this has to happen. We have to determine whether or not we feel we can grant a variance, and then on to the city council, and then they cannot grant this easement without us granting the variance. So it had to happen in this order. If they are to grant the easement, then you basically have an approved project with an indirect access easement granted by the city council. Then I suppose at that point, they could then move forward with the appeal process and hear about that. You know, I looked through the plans, actually went back and listened to a bit of the design review board meeting. You know, I've said that I was a former design review board member. I might not have necessarily agreed with their final rulings and findings on that, but that's not my role here or our role here tonight. There was, you know, some suggestions in the final staff report about doing some other reductions and changes to massing of retaining walls and the overall massing of the height. I guess the overall height of the building was brought down 2 feet, but you know, really what we're tasked with is just specifically this variance. So after reading through the staff report and reading the suggested findings outlined in the staff report, I agree with those findings, and I could make the variance, you know, fine for the variance request. I believe, you know, we have had these in the past, and there's nothing, you know, highly unusual about it. I know what the city has at sometimes and discouraged is, you know, extending roads, doing entire road extensions into areas that would allow you know, future development, particularly possibly opening up large areas to, you know, multiple buildable lots that was not ever intended. So I don't think that's the case here. I also, you know, agree with the point that, you know, has been shown about the property ownership. This, you know, there was a discussion about whether or not the city has any plans to widen Morningside. That was specifically asked of Public Works, and they specifically said no, they have no current plans and didn't raise any opposition to this. Also, based on what's been done with the neighboring lot and the neighboring ownership, that's cut into that space anyway. So they couldn't widen the road even if they wanted to, unless they reached some additional agreement to reacquire. I don't know if it's even possible, the property to do that. So again, I can make the findings for the variance, and I don't know what else we were tasked with there. Basically, that was it, right? You know, it said and finding that said action is exempt from CEQA. So that's my comments.
Well, it seems like the arguments made to not approve this are a lot of it has to do with issues that relate to design review, and we're not doing design review here. Design review has already been done. It's already been stated that that's outside of our purview. If there's view issues, again, those have already been arbitrated in the design review process. There's also arguments about road widenings and parking spaces. And if I know the Public Works Department has no problem demanding major improvements if they think they're necessary, and they have not done so here. So I think we have to go with the Public Works point of view. And the third issue would be, well, this shouldn't be built on. Well, it's zoned residential. You know, if it shouldn't be built on, it wouldn't be zoned residential, it'd be zoned something else. So I'm not finding any reason why I should not be supportive of this proposition.
Would somebody like to make a motion?
I move adoption of resolution approving variance 240590 and finding said action exempt from CEQA
With the revised condition 18?
with the revised condition 18.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg,
Yes.
Chair Sadler,
Yes. Okay, motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Whiten recusing herself and Commissioner Goldman being absent. There's a 14-day right of appeal to the City Council if you don't agree with that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Good luck. $1,500 a square foot.
Do we need to sign in since I said something up there?
You know what my budget was?
Thank you.
105. It's almost 30 years ago.
What I hear, I probably have like tract developers, look at 40, 50 bucks a square foot.
Flat land. Yeah. He said this in the 5 years he's been going through this, it's gone from $1,000 a square foot to 1,500.
It's not gonna be, yeah, looking at those plans, it's not gonna be an easy house to build.
Well, he's not doing any caissons. They're not requiring.
That's the chair.
What's that?
She.
Oh, sure.
Break or.
Yeah, we'll take a little break.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna take a little 5-minute break for our meeting. We'll re-adjourn at 8:45. And we will move on to other business, if there is any other business. Oh, is there another item? Oh. What? I'm ready to go home. Oh, okay. Yes, we are. We do have another item. Okay, we'll be moving on to item 5.5, which Anthony will be presenting for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. Item 5.5 is a request for a Planning Commission recommendation to the City Council on a draft ordinance repealing and replacing the city's ADU regulations, Chapter 25.17 of the Laguna Beach Municipal Code. This item involves both a zoning ordinance amendment and an amendment to the city's local coastal program. And the main impetus of this draft ordinance is that state ADU law is being amended starting January 1st, which has become something of an annual tradition, continual evolution at the state level regarding ADU regulations, and to remain in compliance with state law, and in order to be able to enforce the city's local regulations, the city staff is presenting this ordinance for your recommendation to City Council, and the next step is to present the ordinance to the City Council in December. And there are two state ADU bills that, again, were signed by the governor and take effect on January 1st, which I will briefly summarize. First is Assembly Bill 2533, generally relating to unpermitted ADUs and JADUs, and it essentially expands the pathways to legalize existing unpermitted ADUs, primarily by now qualifying unpermitted JADUs. Currently, the pathway to legalization is only for those ADUs that were constructed prior to January 1st, 2018. That cutoff date is now being pushed to January 1st, 2020. Second law is Senate Bill 1211. This clarifies that there is no replacement parking required when surface parking is being replaced. Currently, the existing law is related to covered and enclosed parking. There is also a new definition for livable space, which ties into another change that this bill introduces related to multifamily dwelling ADUs. And specific to multifamily dwellings are considered primary dwelling units. They may have their own accessory dwelling units or ADUs. And so an apartment building would consist of multiple primary dwelling units, and they may have either converted ADUs created from non-livable areas, or they may have a certain number of detached ADUs. Today, number of detached ADUs is capped at 2 detached ADUs per lot. That would be increased starting on January 1st to up to 8 detached ADUs, but no more than the number of primary dwelling units on the multifamily lot. And just a quick reminder that state ADU law does contemplate that there is also California Coastal Act. The state of California has a coastal zone administered by the Coastal Commission, and state ADU law does continue to include a provision that says that there is nothing in the state ADU law that shall supersede or alter the application of the Coastal Act. And there is one small exception to that, which is that the city is not required to hold any public hearings on a CDP application for an ADU. And here in Laguna Beach, we do have a Certified Local Coastal Program, or LCP, and so the city generally has permitting authority over CDP applications. And the city's LCP includes a number of documents, one of which is Title 25, the city's zoning code. There are 3 primary goals with the proposed draft ordinance. One is to bring the city's ADU regulations into compliance with the new ADU law that takes effect on the 1st of the year. Second is to harmonize the distinct priorities of state ADU law. and the Coastal Act, and specifically coastal access and coastal resource protection policies. And then lastly, improving transparency and efficiency through what we hope are clearer standards than what the city currently has. So key changes with the draft ordinance before you. One is we are restructuring how these regulations are organized to more closely track with state ADU law. Part of that effort was to closely mirror the language in state ADU law. We've encountered some difficulties as we've processed ADU applications just due to how in some areas the city's regulations do depart from the language in state ADU law, and reconciling that and understanding the intent has sometimes proven tricky in the application of city's regulations to specific projects. Another thing that I wanted to point out is changes in terminology. The city's current ADU ordinance considers guaranteed allowance ADUs and non-guaranteed allowance ADUs. In the draft ordinance before you, we discussed building permit only ADUs to more closely reflect the intent in state ADU law. And there are specific classes of ADUs that are building permit only. Those are conversions and detached ADUs that meet certain specified criteria. And then there are the ADUs that require an ADU permit, which are everything else. And those ADU applications would be subject to additional standards in this ordinance, consistent with state law. That would include parking required for the ADU itself, unless it meets a certain exemption, such as proximity to a public transit stop. There are also additional architectural requirements that would apply to those ADUs. For example, there would be line of sight requirements to adjoining residential properties to address, for example, privacy concerns. There is also a section of the draft ordinance that specifically addresses the application of the Coastal Act. Here in Laguna Beach, per state ADU law and the city's LCP, we do require a CDP for, I would say, most ADU applications that we see. And when a CDP is required for an ADU application, the city must make certain findings to grant the CDP. One of those findings requires that we find that the application is in conformance with the city's certified LCP. The draft ordinance clarifies what several of those LCP requirements consist of. They include, for example, required setbacks from the coastal bluff edge, watercourse setbacks. The ordinance also addresses things like the application of the city's additional building setback, which requires that upper floor levels be set back from the setback line. For the projects that do require a CDP, there is also a requirement that any parking that would be displaced for a primary dwelling unit be replaced as part of that CDP application. And that is a requirement that currently exists in the city's ADU ordinance. It was imposed on the city's ordinance by the Coastal Commission when the city submitted its current ADU ordinance to the Coastal Commission for certification. And with that, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution attached to your staff report this evening, which recommends that the City Council adopt the attached ordinance and find that the ordinance and action is exempt from CEQA. That will conclude the staff presentation, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Just a couple. So there's really three tranches of changes. The first is to be consistent with state law, which we really can't do anything about. It is what it is. The second is to be consistent with the LCP, which we really can't do anything about. And the third are, it sounds like that some of these are sort of voluntary changes that the staff has made to sort of address some issues in the current ordinance, just to make it more workable. Do I have that right?
Generally, yes, I would agree with that summary, Commissioner. And what we did to introduce that clarity was generally to mirror, oftentimes word for word, the language in state law.
Right.
And I will also add that when the city adopts an ADU ordinance, it does submit a copy of that locally adopted ordinance to state HCD, and that mirrored language is helpful.
That's what they're looking for. Yeah. So my question is, did you have a comment?
I was just going to echo that oftentimes I've been with other jurisdictions that substantively it is the same and you still get that same comment from HCD. Why isn't it word for word? You try to explain, no, look at it. It's substantively, it's the same thing.
Right.
And they want to.
So since the LCP and the state are really kind of rote, is there anything that we're doing outside of those two tranches that makes it more difficult to process an ADU?
I don't know that we're making things more difficult relative to the rules that apply today. There are some new criteria that apply circumstantially, depending on which set of criteria apply to the ADU project. There are, for example, new provisions directly related to historic resources that don't exist today in the city's ordinance, and we did craft those specifically to be sensitive to those historic resources when ADUs are proposed in a location that could have an impact.
Any others like that?
Nothing that comes to mind.
Okay. And it's my understanding, I saw some correspondence that the Housing and Human Services Committee is supportive of adoption of the ordinance as is.
At least one committee member. I don't know that we've received the body's recommendation.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And I spoke briefly with Cody Engel, who was here for the earlier meeting. And he was mentioning, I was not entirely following him, but he was saying something about, he was hopeful that more types of ADUs would be able to be dealt with on more of an administrative level. But as it is right now, I mean, these things don't require a public hearing at all, right? I mean, it doesn't require a public hearing. The city staff is going to be in charge of granting a coastal development permit if required. And so I'm not sure if I was can you think of what he may have been speaking to?
Yes, Chair. I believe what Cody Engel was alluding to is that the CDP that's required for the ADU can ultimately have one of three outcomes, depending on which set of CDP procedures are applied to the project. When an ADU is not exempt from the CDP requirements, it may result in a minor development CDP. There could be a de minimis waiver that's processed, which waives a public hearing but is reported to the city council, or there may be a full CDP, quote unquote, which does have a public hearing component. Now with the minor development or administrative CDP, that doesn't require a public hearing, but there may be a public hearing based on the requirements of the code and if a hearing is requested, but that is a staff level hearing that's held on those applications. And I will say that with this ordinance, we are not proposing to change when a CDP is required for an ADU. That currently exists in the city's certified LCP and specifically in Chapter 25.07, the city's coastal development permit regulations, and the ordinance before you tonight does not modify that chapter of the municipal code.
Okay, and I know pretty sure I know the answer to this, but you know, a lot of people in town are upset with the current ADU situation in that, you know, here we have this extensive discretionary design review process and people go through hell sometimes in trying to develop their property and put a house and, you know, back and forth, multiple meetings, and neighbors weigh in and they push the house here and they drop it and they do this and that. And they finally get their approval. and the neighbor's happy, and then that applicant puts an ADU right where, they had moved the house away from to maintain this person's, view equity. There's nothing, we've lost our ability to have that discretionary review over ADUs. Then there's no way around it, and there's nothing the city sees as any option to trying to regain some additional authority over that.
Generally, I would agree with that conclusion, Chair. ADUs generally do not require design review. In some cases, they do, but most applicants will design their projects to meet the criteria, the objective criteria in the ordinance, and are therefore exempt from design review. Now, there are some considerations that apply through the CDP application, but CDP would, for example, consider public ocean views. That would not take into consider private view equity concerns, or there might be a private ocean view impact. So the city is quite limited in how it can arbitrate or decide upon on an ADU application. It is quite a departure from the normal order of things with design review.
Okay. Any other additional questions?
Regarding the displaced parking that may occur with the construction of an ADU, either in a converted carport or garage situation, converted carport or garage to an ADU, or just a construction of an ADU on parking spaces, on existing parking spaces. The Coastal Commission ruled that the displaced parking spaces have to be replaced off-site. Is that correct?
They would be replaced on-site.
On-site.
But there is some flexibility in how those replacement spaces can be designed.
Okay, and so what if there isn't room on-site to accommodate, say, the 2 parking spaces that were displaced?
They may need to redesign the ADU or adjust the site somehow to accommodate those replacement spaces if the scenario requires replacement parking. In the alternative, the applicant could, I suppose, apply for a variance, but I don't know how successful that would be. That would vary fact-specific and case-specific.
Has that been an issue with any of the ADU applications to date?
There have been at least a couple, and we try to work with those applicants to suggest how they can accommodate those replacement spaces. We do try to get creative, whether it's tandem spaces in a driveway. If the driveway is perhaps a little bit shallow, we look at a parallel stall. Because maybe the driveway is quite shallow and the face of the garage is quite close to the front lot line abutting the street. Usually there is a way to design it, but it, obviously is ultimately the decision of the applicant if they want to pursue that.
So just kind of on the lines of equity, for example, the city doesn't have, the staff doesn't have on a regular project, doesn't have that kind of discretionary ability to be discretionary about, say, tandem parking. That's a difficult thing to achieve. But in the case of an ADU, that's considered a reasonable solution. Why haven't those ideas been transposed into our whole parking statute? Why are ADUs having a free, why are they special? Okay, they're special, but we have to swallow that. We may not agree with it, but we have to swallow it. But in the case of parking, it seems that's another component of this that seems really inequitable.
It's a great observation, Commissioner. As you've stated, ADUs are special because the state has deemed them to be special.
Yeah.
And so consistent with the spirit of state ADU law, there's additional flexibility that's provided through the ADU regulations. Now, I think more recently, the city has made a sincere attempt to acknowledge that we have very constrained conditions throughout the city. I think creative thinking was very much a part of the housing ordinance that the Planning Commission reviewed and recommended approval to council of about a year ago now. It's now with Coastal Commission. That's related to infill housing on commercially zoned property outside of the downtown specific plan area. And in that case, there was some creative thinking to address parking issues specifically. And this conversation may very well resurface as part of the comprehensive code update.
Okay, there are other examples I could think of, but related to parking, but parking's maybe something good will come out of it.
Any questions, Commissioner Dubin?
Yeah. I've got some kind of rudimentary and, so forgive that. But in regards to the Coastal Act, how much of is Laguna's, as far as where they draw the line on the Coastal Act, is that everything on the west side of Coast Highway, or is more of Laguna involved?
Laguna Beach is rather unique as a coastal city in that just about the entirety of the city is within the coastal zone. The exception would be certain parcels off of El Toro Road. Now, within the coastal zone, there are areas within the Coastal Commission's appeal jurisdiction and then the non-appealable areas. But regardless of appealability, a majority of the city is in the coastal zone. And this ordinance does include provisions that would specifically apply to areas within the coastal zone.
Well, that's what I was getting to, because if the majority of Laguna Beach is in the coastal zone, doesn't that give us more discretionary review of ADUs that are being placed around town because of things like view equity and other things like that? I mean, that's the way I kind of read it, but maybe I'm completely off base on that.
Well, it's all within the framework of the Coastal Act, really, is what it comes down to. So, and Pat could elaborate if needed, but essentially we cannot use the city's coastal zone to require design review and view equity considerations. It does have to be limited to Coastal Act concerns and compliance with the city's LCP, and ADUs do specifically need to be exempt from the city's design review process.
Right, so we can't use the Coastal Act as kind of an end run around to.
That's what I was
to do it. Yeah, so we can't do that. We can, of course, use the Coastal Act like any jurisdiction that is in the coastal zone to effectuate the goals and policies of the Coastal Act. So while it's not maybe necessarily as detailed, things like a public view shed of blue water views comes to mind. That that if you can see something from a public area, public park, and someone wants to put a giant ADU that blocks that, that would be a kind of the quintessential scenarios for which, hey, we can maybe push back on that.
But even if somebody's, say, driving along a parallel road that's a higher elevation, it's a public road, it's higher elevation, and through the trees, they on their daily drive they can see a beautiful whitewater, and then somebody sticks an ADU there. Does that not qualify as being able to have some?
So I mean, it really is a case by case basis.
Okay.
The narrative for which you posit this glorious public road with expansive coastal and whitewater views. Sure, I mean, I can't say for certain one way or the other, but that is exactly kind of what the coastal our inclusion in the coastal zone would potentially allow us to take a look at.
Okay. Excuse me, on page 9 of the ordinance in the size section, I read this part in there, and maybe I'm just again kind of a layman's review of this, but it says an attached ADU can be up to 50% of the existing dwelling's floor area, and that says something to me like if you have a 5,000 square foot footprint of an existing dwelling, that the ADU can be up to 50% of that.
The Commissioner, that the two letters A and B sections should be read together. So there are two considerations. There's the maximum size for a detached or attached ADU, which is either 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet. depending on bedroom count. And then subsection B states that an attached ADU is further limited to 50% of the floor area of the existing dwelling. And so if that is more restrictive, that would be the regulation that applies to that project.
Okay. So I was reading that in my own twisted little way. Height limitation 16 feet total unless near a transit stop, which then allows up to 18 feet and can go up to 20 feet to align with the roof line of the primary residence. Is that correct?
So for that, and we're looking at the top of page 7 of the ordinance for reference, that is for a detached ADU that is within a certain proximity to major transit stop or high quality transit corridor. And those are
We should have
terms that are
none in
defined
Laguna,
in state
right?
law. That you are correct. We did do that analysis previously. We have no such qualifying stops or transit corridors. Now, subsection C down below does allow for an 18-foot tall detached ADU, and that's specifically limited to multifamily sites.
Okay. So now if you're doing an attached ADU, because I think we even had somebody in North Laguna maybe a half a year ago come in and was talking about somebody a neighbor doing an attached ADU to their house, and they were allowed to match the existing dwelling's roof line, which I think could be up to like 25 feet or a second story, and subsequently killed somebody's view of the ocean because of this attached ADU rising to the level of the existing dwelling's roof line. I mean, it just seems like we just don't have any say so over really anything based on state law. It seems like, I mean, we're diminishing people's valuations by allowing ADUs to block ocean views, which is part of why they probably bought the house to begin with. There's just no ability to push back on anything like that at this.
Very limited recourse for the city. Again, we're only able to consider public coastal views. If there is a view concern, it cannot take into account private view equity concerns.
I mean, are people thinking about lawsuits against the city? I mean, not the city, but the state at this point because of things like that? I mean, I know it's abstract.
I mean, so I'm not aware of any for that specific, basically the diminution in property value. Of course, I don't want to say constant, but the pretty frequently reoccurring intrusion into local control is something that a lot of cities are always juggling with about, how far is too far until we finally attempt to push back. They haven't necessarily been super successful.
Right.
I won't bore you with the
No,
federalism argument and hey, the state, but yeah, so yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Thank you. Any more questions of staff? No. I will open the public hearing to our member of the public.
Thank you, folks.
Hello, Lance.
Commissioners, Lance Polster, local architect. And I've been talking to staff and trying to understand this amendment and this change that's been going on. And I think I understand some of it. It's a little bit confusing. And I think you guys are doing a good job trying to figure it out. With limited time, I think I'll just say one thing. I think we all feel much like what some of your questions, what happens when you have no control over ADUs, and we've had control for so many years. I'm coming here tonight for a different reason altogether, although I don't disagree with any of that. For a very long time, since ADUs were now allowed, generally the feeling was that we should promote and support the state mandate. And I do agree with that. I think we have a housing crisis in California, as the governor has said. I think that we all should do our part and help them go along. Control would be great, but the state's made these points that we should be able to allow these things in our neighborhoods within reason. And so the understanding always was that parts of our zoning code don't apply to ADUs so that we can make them happen. Instead of a 20-foot rear yard, there's now a 4-foot rear yard. However, also other parts of the code were also not incorporated, such as open space and lot coverage. The hidden part of what staff is not bringing up is that those parts of the zoning code now make ADUs very difficult in certain situations. And I don't think a lot of people know. We don't have a room full of architects complaining here. I happen to have heard about it from my particular project. I had been waiting because I have a multifamily project, one of a lot of projects going on that did not require open space to be considered. And we got 2 years of working with the city to get to this point, and suddenly now we have to consider zoning codes because of an inadvertent kind of roundabout way, because you're now having to comply with the LCP code, which has the zoning code trailing with it. So I think the intent always was that by allowing setbacks to be only 4 feet, the state intended that you could put them in areas of your lot that you could not necessarily earlier do. This creates a lot of problems, and I just wanted to bring that up to you because a lot of people are upset, and going to be a lot more people are upset when they're in the middle of the application process. This one that I have now in front of me took an inordinate amount of time. It's nothing to do with you guys or anybody else. It's just we had some incompetent staff people, frankly, working on it for a year and apparently didn't know what they were doing. Now we have better staff, but slowly but surely we're getting this. The owner is getting quite frustrated with the whole thing. And we now have to comply with some very onerous parts of our zoning code that work very well for a couple of units, but not for 2 more units of very moderate size, maybe matching the size. I'm talking about something around 800 square feet. And our code notoriously is very difficult for multifamily, any more than a couple of units on a reasonable size, say 4,500 square foot lot. You can't put more units there anymore. They're just not going to be allowed. By this action, we're going to wipe out many, many multifamily ADUs that normally wouldn't really bother anybody, but because of the zoning code, now completely being every part of the zoning code being a part of this. So that's what's not being talked about. No, I mean, Anthony's doing a great job. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying that underneath everything, that's what you want to know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you want to respond to that at all? I mean, I guess, that there are certain lessening of requirements for these ADUs regarding side yard and rear yard setbacks and things like that. But other things have remained the same in terms of lot coverage and open space requirements. And do those things sometimes then hold up or stop an ADU from happening?
Thanks for the question, Chair. So just to address that in a general way. So when an ADU requires a CDP, as was mentioned in the staff presentation, there is a finding that requires that we address whether the CDP application complies with the city's certified LCP. One element of that LCP is Title 25, the zoning code. So the ADU on its own may comply with setback requirements and other criteria set by the city's ADU regulations. Now, if it's causing a new nonconforming condition or exacerbating a nonconforming condition for the site, maybe the primary dwelling unit, that could be an issue potentially. And then that's going to be very case specific as to what that does to the project, whether it's redesigned, whether it requires some type of a public hearing process to consider that. So for example, lot coverage requirements, those in most zones are a guideline that can be modified by the design review board. So in that example, there is a building site coverage requirement that is set based on the size of the lot and your habitable enclosed space, which could include, for example, the ADU and any covered parking count towards the building site coverage. And then that requirement can be modified by the design review board without a variance, subject to making certain findings. And then there are other standards that, of course, if you deviate from those standards, that would require a variance.
And city staff, if they're issuing the CDP, has that type of flexibility in allowing certain, not following the lot coverage rules exactly, or?
That would not be determined at the staff level. It would be referred to the appropriate review body. So generally, that would be the design review board. I will say that in the past, I'm pretty certain that at a minimum, as it relates to the building height measurement for the primary dwelling unit, we've processed, to my knowledge, at least a few height variances caused by an ADU being created below the existing single family. Say that there's maybe an unimproved crawl space, and based on how we measure building height from grade, when you're excavating that crawl space, installing a slab for the ADU, you are now changing the point of measurement for the primary dwelling. Although the ADU on its own may comply with the height measurement, it causes the primary dwelling to be brought out of conformance. And I know we've approved some of those, and that would be a design review board decision ultimately if they can make those findings.
Okay. I'll briefly reopen the public hearing.
It's something I wasn't quite sure I understood. I understand lot coverage for single families is a guideline, but for open space for multifamilies, it's an ordinance, correct?
So that would be similar to the last example I gave, which is building height. That would not be a guideline. And so if you were to deviate from the open space requirement, that would be subject to a variance if it's applied for.
Okay. I will close the public hearing and go to commissioner comments. Anybody in particular like to start?
Like I said earlier, I think, most of this is like non-negotiable. It's just a matter of doing what we have to do. And the part that is negotiable sounds like it's been reasonably developed and not punitive to the ADU process, which I'm very supportive of. Lance's comment notwithstanding, I'm not, is the linkage, I'm turning this into a question, is the linkage to the LCP linkage to the zoning code, is that something new now that's part of this particular action?
It is not, no.
Okay. And I'm, yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm supportive of the project.
Commissioner Dubin.
Yeah, my comment is, reading again through the ordinance and the staff report is that the state considers ADUs as adding affordable coastal living. However, unless somebody deed restricts an ADU or a JADU to comply with very low or lower income households, then really no ADU or JADU is deemed affordable coastal living, certainly here in Laguna Beach. I know we're adding to, Commissioner Kellenberg's, we're adding to the housing stock, which I guess is a good thing, but anybody's building an ADU in Laguna Beach is not going to have it be for, what, at least in my world, what I would consider affordable coastal living. So, but as far as CEQA goes, I can agree with the CEQA exemption as this action implements state law. So that's my comments.
Commissioner Whiten.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to these comments. We are required to approve this, and we may disagree with the approach in some cases, but overall, I also support affordable housing, any kind of housing. I just find the whole situation ironic and frustrating for most of the residents, but really our hands are tied. And hopefully ADUs can help us achieve our RENA numbers. I mean, I don't know how many we've actually constructed at this point, but there seem to be a fair number of applications that have been processed, so.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners. It's it's kind of like one of the things we have to do. It's just hasn't worked out great, I don't think, for Laguna Beach, and the way the thing has been mandated by the state. I don't think they've always thought about how this filters down to different communities, especially unique coastal communities that have our unique topography, have our unique history of having a discretionary design review process. It really just wiped that out and has messed it up. And so I don't think they thought it out very carefully, but that's where we're at with this right now. So, I think this is the appropriate action for us to take. And if somebody would like to make the motion as suggested.
I move that we adopt a resolution recommending City Council adopt attached ordinance zoning ordinance amendments 24-2343 and local coastal program amendment 24-2344 and finding said action exempt from CEQA.
Second.
A roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg?
Yes.
Chair Sadler?
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Now on to other business.
Yes, Chair. Just one quick item to report. I had previously reported on the Better Buzz project, which was called up for review by a council member. On November 12th, the city council did take an action on that council member requested review, and it upheld the Planning Commission's conditional approval with the application of additional, more restrictive conditions of approval, which generally modified certain elements of the street-facing building facade.
They took away the tower.
Yes.
They did?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
There was the standing seam
right.
metal tower element on the right that was quite large.
Yeah.
And in that void, they filled it with a vertical tile that would match the vertical blue tile that was being used in other portions of that facade. That's probably the single most notable change. Another change is they had the horizontal slats over the clear story windows above the canopy, looked something like a louvered screen that was replaced with these vertical thin elements.
Yep, I saw that.
And so were they going to come back with a modified for review by us because we had some issues with the signage and some other things too.
Correct. So the council was not able to take an action on the sign permit application because it was not before them that evening. We have not yet received, to my knowledge, revised sign plans from the applicant.
But we're not going to see the project as a whole come back through here. Or are we?
Correct.
Oh, we're not.
The city council, by upholding the planning commission's decision with additional conditions,
I see.
the
I
design
got it.
review application is approved.
No,
No.
It wasn't even
There
an
was no
appeal.
appeal.
It was a request
rehearing.
for a review by a city council member. So it wasn't even an official appeal. Nobody had to pay an appeal fee. They just kind of reheard it. Anders Lassiter, the architect, came in with a alternate facade that was ready for them to review. So he was able to show them, here's this other option we have. And so they basically took action on that.
So the signage though, will that come back through
Yes.
here?
Yes.
Okay.
And I suppose if it's eligible for administrative approval, perhaps it's approved at a staff level. At this point, I don't know what may be presented to staff. There was an image of a sign shown at the council meeting. Don't happen to know what the letter heights are on that sign. So just wanted to mention that it could potentially be an administrative sign permit, but it may also return to the planning commission to be determined.
It's a lot more in the box. where it
Okay,
should be.
any committee, commissioner, or staff reports?
What-
I have a question. It was brought up on one of the letters on the ADU that there's a moratorium on ADU applications until early next year.
There is no moratorium. The letter writer was referring to the application submittal appointment process. Now, we have now instituted a separate process for ADU applications. Those can actually come in electronically without an appointment.
So there is.
Correct. There is no delay in the initial submittal of an application if it's strictly for an ADU.
But are other applications delayed?
Those other development applications, if they're subject to a planning approval, they would need to be filed with an appointment. And we do make those appointments available through the city website. I know that they do get booked out in advance. We do return any canceled appointments back to the appointment calendar, and those that are ready to submit development applications to the city would monitor appointment availability and select the next available when there is an appointment that becomes available.
What I hear is it's very backed up into the spring somewhere.
We're not quite that far out. Generally, we're booked out about 60 days in advance.
Oh, okay. I have a question about the Farmers Bank. What's happening with those screens? It's November, isn't it? Yes. And they were supposed to have them up in November, if I remember correctly.
I think that got delayed till early December, I think.
Oh, was it a production problem?
Correct. I actually received an email from the Farmers and Merchants representative yesterday. She mentioned that while they don't have a firm date, the perforated panels are due for the first week of December, and the sunshades, which are proposed on the ocean-facing elevation, are pushed to January, but she'll continue to keep me informed.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hotel Laguna, any updates on what's going on there?
I do not have any updates on that project.
Active Culture has, and as far as I can tell, unpermitted trellis that was built over the outdoor seating area. My question is, do we have someone in code enforcement that drives around regularly to check for these things? How did that happen? I mean, you don't just throw that up. It's a metal structure that's attached to the building. It's welded. It's not just thrown up overnight. So do we have somebody who drives around and looks to see if they're code violations?
In most instances, based on city policy, code enforcement is not proactive. It generally is responsive to a complaint that's filed with the city. Now, in this case, I do have personal knowledge of a complaint that was filed. I did meet with the business owner, and we did have a conversation about what the application process would look like should they want to request that the Planning Commission consider approving the patio structure. Staff expressed some concerns with that structure, so I don't know that they will be pursuing that application, but their options are either to remove the unpermitted construction or proceed with a development application, which would be subject to Planning Commission approval.
That's a historic building.
It is, and that is one of the concerns that
Yeah.
staff had expressed, and that's on a street-facing elevation.
Now, I mean, I understand code enforcement is complaint driven, but in the public realm on Coast Highway, this isn't the only example of illegal construction or illegal signage that's proliferated. Or just look right downtown, the block on the ocean side between the Greeter's Corner and the hotel. All of those windows are plastered with posters or menus or temporary stuff that's attached to the side of buildings. I mean, why are those things, why are they there? They've been there for months. And why doesn't the city, at least in the downtown, initiate a proactive code enforcement? Even, people complain about this and people submit complaints to the city, but it's not happening. And this isn't difficult. Let's go over there right now and rip them off the walls. I mean, it's silly. It makes this place look shabby.
I appreciate the comment, Commissioner. Probably not directed at the appropriate staff person.
No, not,
maybe
it's
better
not
discussion
personal
for-
in any way, but it's
Come on,
extremely
Anthony, you have to go out
frustrating.
and drive around now.
I'm happy to drive with the code enforcement. There's just an endless amount of stuff, you know, but it's
Well,
not
kind-
going to happen unless the
Kind of-
city gets
kind of along the
involved.
same lines, when not necessarily a formal complaint, but when the city becomes aware of some unpermitted construction on a historic building, such as came up recently on one of our meetings about a trellis for a parklet. I'm hoping that the city's following up on that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, there is active code enforcement
Okay.
associated with that.
Because that was pretty stunning. I mean, they submitted a rendering that showed a rooftop trellis in the background that was not permitted. It's like
You know, the gall.
submitting a document to the city going like, here, look what we've done. It's like,
But
Speaking-
just-
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Speaking of which, the Forest Avenue Mall situation, has there been any further update from the ownership about what they did that we requested them not doing?
What's that, George?
The Forest Avenue Mall, they painted the bricks, which we asked them not to, and then they didn't do the accent and trim color that we also asked them. to do.
Oh, yes, right.
It's just one big monolithic color right now.
Yes, so I don't have any new updates to share with the commission this evening. The planner that served as a project manager on that design review application did let the applicant know that they can either modify the improvements to comply with the planning commission's conditional approval by removing the paint from the brick and adding a trim color, or they can file a planning application to return to the planning commission to request that you consider approving the as-built conditions. At this time, I don't know which approach the applicant intends to take. I know that the planner that laid out those two options does have a date on our calendar in which she'll circle back, and if there's no steps being taken to do one or the other, this will be handed off to code enforcement.
Yeah.
Correct.
And did that go through then plan review?
No, it did not, for the reason that the painting of the building did not require a building permit. And so staff was unaware that work was occurring that conflicted with the planning commission's approval.
So they painted it, but they didn't paint it according to the approval.
Exactly.
They need to paint it according to the approval. I don't understand why they should be given the option to come back and have us approve what they decided they wanted to do. What kind of thinking is that? What is the point in doing this work? You know, no. I just think that staff, I really would like to see a little more direction on staff's part on some of these things. They just need to comply, and that's that. It's as simple as that. Or there should be a hefty fine thrown at them. I mean, hefty, not one of these $1,000 fines. I mean, we have a process here. The city is trying to, you know, and we do have applicants who do their best to comply with all of our odious requirements. And then we have people who just blow it off. And then we're going to allow them to come back with, you know, their preferred scheme. I don't understand the logic of that. You know,
I think what they did was their preferred scheme, even though we requested them not to do.
I know that. They did what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of that going on right now. And I know one of the council members is really kind of riled up about it. So it's reached the council level. And, you know, it all comes down to we do our work the best we can. And then, you know, code enforcement, we need to activate that a little bit more, I think. And I think the staff should take a stronger point of view on some of these things. It's legal that they do take a stronger point of view, isn't it?
Of course, I'm not going to say it's
Yeah,
illegal.
on everything.
I will say that staff's ultimate goal is always compliance, and your point is very well taken. The counterpoint is that, hey, I am going to apply to try to get my way, and it's very difficult for staff to say you cannot do that. Understanding that during the interim there should be some pressure to say, hey, you don't.
So out of curiosity, what is the action? Like, let's just say they continue to blow us off. And they don't reapply and they don't change the color. They just blow us off. What's the city do?
We start with a notice of violation. Progressively higher fines are then issued. And if the matter needs to be handed to the city attorney's office, from there, we would do so.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, somebody'd like to make a motion to adjourn to our next regularly
Which is
scheduled.
December 4th, I believe, is that?
Move to adjourn to our next regular meeting on December 4th, 2024, our last meeting of the year.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg? Chair Sadler?
Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you. Hey, Anthony, when do we